Chapter 1092. The sword light soared through the air. Driven by his physique, his energy condensed and his sword energy erupted. It was like a shooting star, like an aurora. The incomparably sharp sword tip pierced through the inferno devil leopard's neck and was instantly pulled out. Blood sprayed everywhere. But the inferno devil beast's life force was extremely tenacious. The muscles on its neck contracted and immediately stopped the bleeding. With a furious roar, the inferno devil leopard's claws tore through the air. With a sonic boom, it wanted to tear apart Chu Mu. His footsteps intertwined as he instantly retreated, narrowly avoiding the sharp claws. The five-phase sword slashed out, cutting off an arm. Then he spun around and cut off its head. Even though the inferno devil beast's physique was tyrannical and its life force was astonishing, it still couldn't survive with its head cut off. After cutting open the purgatory devil leopard's corpse, Chu Mu found a fingernail-sized white object near its heart. He held it in his hand and squeezed it. It was a bit like jelly, but it wasn't as brittle as jelly. It was extremely elastic and emitted waves of light fragrance. Smelling it made one feel comfortable. Although this was his first time seeing it, Chu Mu knew what it was. It was the essence of an inferno devil beast. The essence source can be directly consumed. It can strengthen the body and also speed up the recovery of injuries and stamina. Chu Mu looked at the essence source in his hand and silently said. Soon after, he flicked it into his mouth and swallowed it. The essence source slid into his stomach and quickly melted. Chu Mu only felt a cool feeling diffuse in his stomach and gradually spread throughout his entire body. His body felt as if it was being washed by a clear spring, and his exhausted stamina quickly recovered. This feeling only lasted for a dozen breaths of time. During this time, although Chu Mu felt extremely comfortable, he was still vigilant of his surroundings to avoid being ambushed. The essence had completely melted and been absorbed by his body. His stamina had completely recovered and he felt even better than before. Moving his body, he carefully felt that his physique had been strengthened. It was only an essence, so its effect on strengthening his physique wasn't obvious at all. In the swordless purgatory, a swordsman's sword intent, sword energy, and rule power would all be suppressed. Even their physical strength would be suppressed to the standard of an ordinary Ichino sword of Gojoseon. Furthermore, the purgatory had 9 layers, and the purgatory demonic beasts grew stronger with each layer. Just like now, in the 4th layer of swordless purgatory, Chu Mu could feel that the purgatory magical beasts were even more tyrannical and their physiques were even stronger. With the astonishing sharpness of the 5-phase swords, it was starting to feel a little difficult. If he reached the 5th layer of the swordless purgatory, it would be even more difficult to kill the purgatory magical beasts with the 5-phase sword. After all, the sharpness of the 5-phase swords was insufficient. Consuming essence source could strengthen one's physique to a certain extent. It would increase one's strength, speed, explosive power, stamina, endurance, recovery, and other aspects. It was also very useful for increasing one's strength. Comprehending the essence of a sword art would allow one to comprehend sword energy. However, there were very few swordsmen who could do this. Comparatively speaking, if one continuously strengthened their physique and used a sharper sword to kill their way through the 9th layer of swordless purgatory, they would also be able to comprehend sword energy. Different paths lead to the same destination. It could be said that each path had its own benefit, but overall, the first point was better. First, one had to comprehend the essence of a sword art and comprehend sword energy. At that time, one's strength would increase greatly. In the swordless purgatory, it would be easier to cultivate sword energy and increase the level and power of sword energy. It would also be possible to kill more purgatory magical beasts and obtain more essence source. As for the second point, it was impossible for an ordinary sword of Gojoseon to achieve it. The reason was very simple. A low-grade sword of Gojoseon would use a low-grade holy sword. A mid-grade sword of Gojoseon would use a mid-grade holy sword. A high-grade sword of Gojosian would use a high-grade holy sword. A Nirvana realm sword of Gojosian would use a top-grade holy sword. The higher the grade of a holy sword, the sharper it would be. Chu Mu was certain that an ordinary low-grade holy sword could only cause light injuries to the purgatory magical beasts on the 4th level of the swordless purgatory. As for a top-grade low-grade holy sword like the 5-phase sword, which was comparable to an ordinary mid-grade holy sword, it would not be able to cause any harm to the purgatory magical beasts on the 6th level. Chu Mu only had 2 choices. 1. Comprehend the essence of a sword art and grasp sword energy before reaching the 6th level. 2. Obtain more purgatory magical beasts' essence source on the 4th and 5th level, strengthen his physique, and leave the swordless purgatory. He would then raise his cultivation to the mid-grade sword of Gojosian and exchange for a high-grade mid-grade holy sword and re-enter the swordless purgatory. If possible, Chu Mu would naturally lean towards the first option. However, he did not have much confidence. He could only do his best. "You've followed me for so long. Still not coming out?" Suddenly, Chu Mu withdrew his thoughts and said indifferently. The surroundings were silent. It was as if Chu Mu was talking to himself. "You're indeed capable. Looks like you're definitely not an ordinary direct disciple in the 5 elements sword sect." An indifferent voice sounded. Shortly after, a figure seemed to appear from the darkness and appeared 100 meters away from Chu Mu. It was Yan Feng's brother, a disciple of the Dark Knight sword sect. "I'll give you one more chance. Hand over 200,000 low-grade origin cores and kowtow to admit your mistake. Then I'll spare your dog life," Yan Hui threatened coldly. "I hope the Dark Knight sword sect's disciple will not disappoint me," Chu Mu said softly. He stomped on the ground slightly and the muscles in his legs twitched. The explosive power pushed his body forward like an arrow leaving the bow. The 5-phase sword took advantage of the momentum and slashed down. Chu Mu's decisiveness stunned Yan Hui. He had never imagined that a mere direct disciple of the 5 elements sword sect would dare to attack him. Shortly after, Yan Hui smiled. He did not put Chu Mu in his eyes and slashed out with his sword. The sword was like a stream of light, instantly illuminating the surroundings. It pierced towards Chu Mu with unparalleled speed, wanting to kill him in one strike. The sword was swift, tyrannical, and explosive. It displayed Yan Hui's shocking attainments in sword art. Chu Mu's heart trembled. He did not dare to underestimate his opponent. The sword he slashed out did not stop. Its speed increased by 30%. As his muscles twitched, the power became even more tyrannical. It was like a volcanic eruption. This was the swordless purgatory. It was a place where one did not need a reason to kill. In the face of danger, one would not consider the consequences. If one did not kill, one would be killed. The logic was simple. Therefore, Chu Mu and Yan Hui did not hold back. Every sword attack was aimed to kill the other. Without sword intent, sword energy, and the power of laws, they only relied on their physique and pure sword art. The range of their attacks was not large. In close combat, every move was extremely dangerous. The 2 swords collided. As sparks flew, a tyrannical power erupted. Chu Mu only felt that the power of Yan Hui's sword was difficult for him to resist. He knew that Yan Hui must have consumed a lot of essence. In terms of physique, he had already surpassed him. Of course, if the seal was lifted, Yan Hui's physique might not be stronger than his. A tyrannical sword energy erupted. The sharp sword slashed through the air, wanting to take Yan Hui's life. Yan Hui's killing intent was awe-inspiring. He looked like he would not give up until he killed Chu Mu. However, Chu Mu was not that easy to kill. His sword arts were sharp, his reaction was swift, and his application of power was unique. For a moment it was hard to determine the winner. The 2's faces were cold. A sharp light flickered in their eyes. While fighting, they were also looking for the other's weakness. The surrounding air shattered. Their swords slashed through the air, bringing with them a terrifying sword wind. They left clear, straight, and crisscrossed marks on the hard ground. A true expert, even if they were suppressed and unable to use all kinds of power, the sword wind produced by their swords still possessed a terrifying killing power. After a fierce battle, the two sides were unable to determine a victor. However, Chu Mu was able to grasp his advantage and the opponent's advantage. In terms of physique, there was a gap between them. In terms of sword arts, their attainments were about the same. But in reality, there was still a gap. This deep knight sword sect's disciple had been in the swordless purgatory for much longer than him. As such, Chu Mu had an idea. As his muscles trembled, he used the power of vibration. The 5-phase sword in his hand vibrated as he executed the 32 swords of wind and lightning. Wind whistled, thunder rumbled, and thunder rumbled. The wind and lightning merged with the power of vibration, increasing the power of the wind and lightning sword technique by several times. As soon as they came into contact, Yan Hui's expression changed. He felt an irresistible power rushing towards him. The sword in his hand almost flew out of his hand. He hastily grasped it, and the power of vibration made his hand numb. Although he immediately used a method to disperse the power, the sword in his hand was still pushed away by Chu Mu. Chu Mu's eyes narrowed. The 5-phase sword continued forward without mercy. "Stop!" Yan Hui was horrified and hurriedly shouted. At the same time, he moved his feet and used some kind of magical footwork to quickly retreat. The footwork that Yan Hui used was very mysterious. The distance of each step was very short, but the speed was very fast. Moreover, there was a special pattern to it. It actually caused Chu Mu's straightforward killing strike to miss. Feeling that Chu Mu was hard to deal with and powerful, Yan Hui wanted to retreat. He used his footwork and quickly retreated, planning to escape. Once he returned to the camp, he would call on the other disciples of the Dark Knight Sword sect to kill Chu Mu together. With a thought, Yan Hui was about to leave. Suddenly, the 5-phase sword flew out of his hand. This move was completely out of Yan Hui's expectations. Unable to dodge, the 5-phase sword directly pierced his body. He didn't die, but he was injured. As his body paused, Chu Mu flew forward. His right hand grabbed at the air, avoiding Yan Hui's counterattack. He grabbed the hilt of the 5-phase sword, twisted it, and pulled it out again. His left hand clenched into a fist and heavily punched Yan Hui's chest. With another slash, he killed him. "You!" Yan Hui couldn't imagine that he would die under Chu Mu's sword like this. His eyes were wide open, his face full of unwillingness, and he fell back. Chu Mu panted a few times. This battle had been difficult. If he had been careless, he might have been the one to die. But in the end, he had won. It had to be said that after the various powers were suppressed, although the battle between swordsmen wasn't as magnificent or vast, it was even more soul-stirring. Chapter 1093. Yan Hui was very strong. Chu Mu hoped that Yan Hui's collection would be rich as well. He took Yan Hui's spatial ring and sword. That was a high-grade holy sword. In other words, Yan Hui was a high-grade sword of Gojoseon. If he had met Yan Hui outside the swordless purgatory, Chu Mu would have died. He wouldn't even have been able to escape. But in the swordless purgatory, Yan Hui had died under Chu Mu's sword. After collecting the spoils of war, Chu Mu quickly left. Soon, purgatory devil beasts would come over after smelling the scent of blood. Yan Hui's corpse would become a delicacy in the stomach of those purgatory devil beasts, and the corpse would be destroyed. As he left, he recovered his strength. After using the vibrational energy several times, Chu Mu felt a tearing pain in his muscles. He knew that it was because his physique couldn't withstand the vibrational energy's eruption several times in a row. Fortunately, he had controlled it and hadn't used the vibrational energy. Otherwise, his physique wouldn't have been able to withstand it. If he met another purgatory magical beast now, it would be disastrous. As for the 5-phase sword, because it had clashed with Yan Hui's high-grade holy sword many times, there were many cracks in it. The 5-phase sword was a peak low-grade holy sword. In terms of toughness and sharpness, it wasn't inferior to a mid-grade holy sword. However, it couldn't compare to a high-grade holy sword. This was just an ordinary high-grade holy sword. If it had been a peak high-grade holy sword, the 5-phase sword would have been broken long ago. After all, it didn't have sword origin to protect it. He didn't follow the path he had taken. That was because he had killed many purgatory magical beasts on the way here. The blood and flesh of those magical beasts would definitely attract other purgatory magical beasts. Not daring to be distracted, Chu Mu walked step by step, trying his best to make his footsteps as light as possible so as not to cause any commotion. It had to be said that his luck was extremely good. When he returned to the Heavenly Sword Camp, he didn't encounter any purgatory magical beasts or other swordsmen. After entering the Sky Sword Camp, Chu Mu went straight to the unsealing room, paid another 100,000 low-grade origin pills, and entered the unsealing room. What Chu Mu did not know was that when he walked into the Sky Sword Camp and went straight to the unsealing room, he was being watched by a pair of eyes. He actually didn't die? Yanfeng looked at Chu Mu in a daze. Could it be that Big Brother didn't find him? That should be it. Otherwise, with Big Brother's strength, he would definitely be able to kill him. But for some reason, Yanfeng had a feeling of uneasiness in his heart. A thought was on the verge of popping out, but he was unwilling to admit it. Inside the unsealing room, Chu Mu's strength was restored. The exuberant life force of the wood avatar surged through his entire body. In just a few breaths' time, all his injuries were healed and Chu Mu was back to his peak state. He quickly took out Yan Hui's interspatial ring. Since Yan Hui was dead, the divine will imprint inside had automatically dissipated. Chu Mu's divine will easily seeped into the ring and was immediately pleasantly surprised. As expected of the personal disciple of the Deep Night Sword sect, a galactic dominator, his collection was indeed rich. Just the low-grade origin pills alone were as high as 1,300,000. There were even 100,000 mid-grade origin pills that Chu Mu had never seen before. One mid-grade elemental elixir was theoretically equivalent to 10 low-grade elemental elixirs. 100,000 mid-grade elemental elixirs were theoretically equivalent to 1,000,000 low-grade elemental elixirs, but very few people would exchange mid-grade elemental elixirs for low-grade elemental elixirs. Not to mention other things, just the harvest of origin pills alone was enough to surprise Chu Mu. This Yan Hui was definitely not an ordinary person among the personal disciples of the Deep Night Sword sect. No matter what, all of Yan Hui's wealth had become Chu Mu's. Other than 1,300,000 low-grade origin pills and 100,000 mid-grade origin pills, Chu Mu also obtained 8 origin pills, which were about the same size as the one he had consumed before. In addition, there was also a high-grade saint sword. Pulling out the sword, it was sharp like a bolt of cold lightning. It was the best of the high-grade saint swords, and there were ancient words engraved on the sword: Purple Lightning. Good sword. Chu Mu looked at it carefully and could not help but nod his head. Unfortunately, a high-grade saint's sword was not something he could use now. He could only put it away for now and wait until he broke through to the high-grade sword of Gojoseon in the future. Putting away the Purple Lightning sword, Chu Mu took out a few silk books. These books were made of extraordinary materials that were impervious to fire and water, and difficult to be damaged by blades and swords. They were martial arts. 2 of them were cultivation techniques, 2 were sword techniques, and 1 was a movement technique. Chu Mu did not look at the cultivation techniques because the divine desolate sword art that he cultivated was a divine-grade cultivation technique. Even in the ancient god world, there were very few divine-grade cultivation techniques. The 2 sword techniques gave Chu Mu a pleasant surprise. One of them was a low-grade earth-grade sword technique called Cloud-Leading Mist Sword Technique, and the other was a mid-grade earth-grade sword technique called Thunderclap Cloud Shattering Sword Technique. The cloud-leading mist sword technique was related to wind, water, and cloud. The thunderclap cloud-shattering sword technique was related to wind, thunder, and cloud. Strictly speaking, Chu Mu had the qualifications to cultivate it. Unfortunately, his cloud ultimacy had not successfully transformed into cloud law. The most important thing now was to comprehend sword force, and then transform fire ultimacy and earth ultimacy into law. The cloud ultimacy would be placed at the back. However, Chu Mu could still read and comprehend these two sword techniques and cultivate the sword moves within. However, he could not stay in the unsealing room for long. Chu Mu immediately put them away and looked at the last book, a movement technique. Inch step. 2 words appeared vividly on the paper. This was a peak-grade earth-grade footwork technique. The ancient god world's classification of cultivation techniques was different from the immemorial world. A top-grade earth-grade movement technique was already a very high-level martial art. This footwork technique named inch step made Chu Mu very happy, because he was lacking a footwork technique. This must be the movement technique that Yan Hui used previously. Chu Mu said to himself. In the previous battle, Yan Hui's movement technique was exquisite and almost allowed him to escape. If not for Chu Mu's unexpected move of letting go of Yan Hui's sword, Yan Hui would have definitely escaped back to the Sky Sword camp. In addition to the Yuan Dan essence, purple lightning sword, and martial arts, there were also some elixirs and so on. Now, these things had all become Chu Mu's. When the time was up, Chu Mu also left the unsealing room. This time, he did not immediately leave the Sky Sword camp. Instead, he paid 10,000 inferior grade Yuan Dan to rent a room. When the time came, he would be refunded. After entering the room and closing the door, Chu Mu took out the Yuan Dan essence and consumed it. A cool aura spread throughout his body, strengthening it continuously. After a few dozen breaths, the cool aura disappeared. Chu Mu moved around a bit and felt that his physique had indeed been strengthened. It was rather obvious. Yuan Dan essence is indeed a good thing. Chu Mu thought to himself. He wanted to obtain more Yuan Dan essence now. It would be very helpful for increasing his strength. After that, Xiao Chun took out the 2 sword techniques and carefully read them, comprehending the essence of them. The low-grade earth-grade cloud-leading mist-winding sword technique was only slightly stronger than a top-grade mortal-grade sword technique. Its focus was on illusions. When executed, it could interfere with one's vision and even spiritual sense. It would make one feel as if they were in a fog, making it difficult for them to make preparations. As for the thunderclap cloud-shattering sword technique, it was a sword technique that focused on destructive power. Its focus was on one word, shattering. One sword strike could shatter the clouds in the sky. Its power was extremely terrifying. Chu Mu had only comprehended the essence of the 2 sword technique. He had not gone deep into it yet. Therefore, it only took him 2 days. If he wanted to completely comprehend the essence of the 2 sword techniques, it would take him at least 10 times the time. The first thing he needed to do was to comprehend the movement art. He put away the 2 sword techniques and took out the top-grade earth-grade movement art. 2 big silver words appeared on the cover. Inch step. He opened the cover and saw the first page. The general outline jumped into his eyes. Within a small space, he could advance and retreat freely. It looked simple and plain, but it had a kind of heroic aura. Within a small space, he could advance and retreat freely. He then opened the second page and looked at the main content. He first quickly read it once, then turned it to the beginning. He read it carefully word by word, slowly comprehending it. Apart from the text, there were also corresponding pictures to look at. The pictures were both excellent. The people in the pictures were drawn with red dots and red lines, showing the way to use force. It was easier to comprehend. With such convenience, with Chu Mu's comprehension, he could quickly comprehend the essence of it. After memorizing all the contents of the inch step, Chu Mu took a step forward and started to cultivate the inch step, a top-grade earth-grade movement art. He did not know whether this movement art was a martial art of the Dark Knight Sword sect or a martial art that Yen Hui had obtained himself. No matter what, it was Chu Mu who was cultivating it. Inch step, inch step, inch step. What was inch step? Chu Mu was very clear in his heart. Although he hadn't mastered it yet, Chu Mu already knew that inch step was a very practical footwork technique. Its use wasn't for hurrying on the road, but rather in battle. Within a small space, he could jump and move, front and back, left and right. He could dodge and counterattack. The space in this room was not big. If he were to cultivate other movement arts, there would not be enough space. However, there was more than enough space to cultivate the inch step. Chu Mu moved his feet continuously within a 1-meter radius. He moved left and right, forward and backward, forward and backward, forward and backward, forward and backward. The strength of the inch step was mainly focused on the legs. The body only cooperated slightly, so it was not important. The pictures on the silk booklet showed the path and key points of strength exertion. They were also focused on the legs and were somewhat complicated. If an ordinary swordsman wanted to cultivate the inch step, they would have to spend a long time. For example, Yen Hui had cultivated the inch step for several years, but he had not even reached the small success stage. However, to Chu Mu, this inch step was extremely suitable for him. Because he cultivated the power of vibration, his control over his own muscles was something other swordsmen couldn't compare to. His own perception, along with a few decades of immersion, had already reached the pinnacle. Under his conscious control, Chu Mu's leg muscles vibrated at a low frequency time and time again. His feet moved naturally, expending some energy. The more he cultivated, the more Chu Mu felt the exquisiteness of this movement art. He was certain that if he could cultivate this movement art to the Deshang level, his strength would definitely increase by a lot, and he would be more suitable for battle. From the beginning of his cultivation, Chu Mu became more and more familiar with it. He could advance and retreat within a small space. The distance between each step was either a little longer or a little shorter, and so on. Chapter 1094. Chu Mu came from the Zhentian school. Aside from sword techniques, he was most proficient in the power of vibrations. The inch step was slightly related to the power of vibrations. For other swordsmen, the entry level was like a natural chasm. However, for Chu Mu it was extremely easy. 10,000 inferior grade primal cores and rented a room for 10 days. Aside from the first 2 days, he used to comprehend the 2 earth-grade sword techniques. He used the remaining 8 days to cultivate the inch step. His comprehension was outstanding, and his grasp of vibrations surpassed countless people. After 8 days of bitter training, Chu Mu's grasp of the inch step surpassed Yen Hui's. What he lacked now was actual combat to test the results of his cultivation. After leaving the room, Chu Mu first went to the sword forging room. He spent half a day and some primal cores to repair the 5-phase sword before leaving the sky sword camp. Yen Feng stared at Chu Mu's back from afar. The bad feeling in his heart grew stronger. It had already been 10 days, but his elder brother Yen Hui had not returned. Something was wrong. With this thought, Yen Feng turned and left. Chu Mu did not see Yen Feng. Due to the restriction of his strength, his 5 senses were also affected. Although he could vaguely feel someone staring at him from afar, he did not know who it was. With the idea of trying the inch step, Chu Mu felt a little excited. He quickly left the sky sword camp and entered the purgatory again. With his 5 senses raised to the limit, Chu Mu could feel all the movements in the surroundings. After entering the 4th floor of the swordless purgatory, Chu Mu walked towards the whirlpool door of the 5th floor. He did not purposely create any commotion, nor did he restrain the sound of his footstep. He just went with the flow. As he walked, he indeed encountered 2 purgatory demonic beasts. They were 2 purgatory werewolves. If it were before, Chu Mu would definitely avoid the 3 purgatory werewolves of the 4th floor. He was not afraid of a one-on-one, but a 1-on-2 would be dangerous. The purgatory werewolves of the 4th floor were much stronger than the purgatory werewolves of the 3rd floor. Looking at their taller bodies and stronger muscles, as well as their darker fur and sharp claws, Xiao Qin knew that these purgatory werewolves were not to be trifled with. However, the more powerful a purgatory magical beast was, the higher the probability of condensing essence source. Among the purgatory magical beasts, the purgatory werewolf was the most powerful one that Chu Mu had encountered so far. The purgatory werewolves' sense of smell was very sharp, and they had long discovered Chu Mu. With a howl, they sprinted towards him from both sides. The fiendish aura rushed over, making Chu Mu's scalp tingle. The 5-phase swords were unsheathed. Although they were not as good as before after being repaired, the difference was not too great. They could barely cut through the purgatory Leekin's fur. Under the purgatory werewolf's burst of power, its speed was astonishingly fast. It crossed the distance of thousands of meters in just a few breaths of time. Its sharp claws clawed out, and a cold light wreaked havoc. Just as a claw tore through the sky and was about to tear apart Chu Mu's face, Chu Mu's upper body did not react at all. The muscles in his legs trembled, and his power erupted in an instant. He slid back and narrowly avoided the claw attack. At the same time, the other purgatory werewolf's sharp claws also clawed at Chu Mu's ribs. If he was hit, his stomach would definitely be cut open. Using the inch step, he could advance and retreat freely in a circle. He constantly dodged the attacks of the 2 purgatory werewolves. It was as if he was dancing on the tip of a knife, walking on a tightrope. If he was slightly careless, his stomach would be cut open, and he would become the purgatory werewolf's food. Chu Mu was fully focused. He constantly used the inch step to dodge the purgatory werewolf's attacks in a circle. His body was sometimes low and sometimes slanted. Along with his footwork, the sword in his hand would sometimes block. After 8 days of hard training, Chu Mu had completely grasped the method of exerting force using the inch step. He only lacked actual combat experience. Now, facing 2 purgatory werewolves was extremely dangerous. If he was not careful, he would be killed. The pressure was immense. Pressure turned into motivation. Chu Mu's understanding of the inch step deepened continuously. In the beginning, he still had to use the 5-phase swords to block. As time went on, the 5-phase swords gradually became idle. He could use the inch step to deal with the 2 purgatory werewolves. Due to being tempered by the wood phase origin life force all year round, Chu Mu's body was even more resilient. The recovery speed of his physical strength was also much faster than other swordsmen. Even though he was greatly suppressed by the swordless purgatory's power, he was still better than other swordsmen. Moreover, Chu Mu's application of the power of vibration was at its peak. Naturally, he knew how to better conserve his physical strength. Therefore, he could continue to deal with the 2 purgatory werewolves. Unknowingly, a few hours had passed. Chu Mu's inch step became more and more refined. He felt that these few hours of cultivation had completely digested the 8 days of accumulation and had improved. No matter how the 2 purgatory werewolves attacked, they were all blocked or dodged by Chu Mu. They were extremely furious. The muscles all over their bodies swelled, and the speed of their claws increased. From time to time, they would open their mouths and bite Chu Mu, emitting a fishy smell. Their teeth were cold and sharp. If bitten, the outcome would be very miserable. However, Chu Mu dodged them all. "I've reached my limit," Chu Mu said to himself after using it a few times. The 2 purgatory werewolves could no longer bring him more pressure. The cultivation of the inch step ended here, and the counterattack began. Under the coordination of the inch step, he unleashed the Gale Swift sword. The fur of the 4th layer purgatory werewolves was very tough. After the damaged 5-phase sword was repaired, its sharpness was slightly weaker. When it cut through the purgatory werewolf's fur, it was a little obscure, and the damage caused wasn't that obvious. Fortunately, Chu Mu's eyesight was outstanding. He first focused on dealing with one purgatory werewolf. His sword greeted the wound, causing it to expand and deepen. It was so deep that the bone could be seen and blood spurted out. Even if the purgatory werewolf's physique was tyrannical and could control the contraction of its muscles, it was difficult to stop the blood from spurting out. The lethality wasn't enough. Fortunately, the inch step was amazing. After dodging, Chu Mu finally killed one purgatory werewolf. The pressure on him was greatly reduced. The other purgatory werewolf actually turned and ran away after being injured. The purgatory werewolf's explosive speed was extremely fast. Chu Mu couldn't catch up for a while. Even if he did, he couldn't catch up. He could only watch as the purgatory werewolf left. The inch step was indeed magical. Unfortunately, it had its limitations. It was only suitable for dodging in a small area. If it was used in a hurry, it would be fine for a short distance because of its explosive power and speed. But for a long distance, its disadvantages would show. There were advantages and disadvantages. Chu Mu didn't have anything to regret. After cutting open the purgatory werewolf's body, he found a piece of essence source and immediately consumed it. It turned into a clear stream that spread throughout his body. After a dozen breaths, it disappeared. Chu Mu felt that his body seemed to have been strengthened a little. As Chu Mu continuously went deeper into the fourth layer of swordless purgatory and approached the whirlpool gate, he had also killed dozens of purgatory devil beasts. The most dangerous time was when he faced 6 purgatory devil beasts at the same time. One of them was a purgatory leakin. Fortunately, his inch step had improved a little. At the price of a light injury, he successfully killed the 6 purgatory werewolves. After killing dozens of purgatory werewolves, he only obtained 3 pieces of essence source. This made Chu Mu sigh at the low production rate of essence source. Naturally, he also consumed all 3 pieces of essence source. His physique was strengthened a little, and his stamina increased. Essence source was the condensation of the blood chi of the purgatory werewolves. Every piece could strengthen a swordsman's physique. Although the effect was small, it didn't have any side effects. Furthermore, it could be consumed without limit. The effect wouldn't be weakened at all. Unfortunately, it wasn't easy to obtain essence source. The closer he got to the whirlpool door, the stronger the purgatory werewolves he encountered. Chu Mu was somewhat helpless. The sharpness of the 5-phase swords was very difficult to deal heavy damage to the purgatory werewolf. He would often have to attack the same wound a few more times, widening and deepening the wound before he could kill them. After many battles, Chu Mu suddenly had an idea, and that was to apply the inch step to his sword technique. The specialty of the inch step was that it allowed him to move around in a small space. The instantaneous explosive power was extremely shocking, and his speed was several times faster than normal. If he could apply the inch step to his sword technique, it would cause the instantaneous explosive power of each sword strike to increase by several times. He would definitely be able to kill the purgatory werewolves even more easily. Although the 5-phase sword's sharpness wasn't enough, their material wasn't bad. With enough power, they would be able to easily break through the purgatory werewolf's skin. With this idea in mind, Chu Mu put it into action, directly comprehending it. The cultivation of the inch step mainly focused on the exertion points of the leg muscles. When the various exertion points were combined, they would instantly erupt. It was related to the power of the vibration, but it wasn't the power of the vibration. It should be a disguised use of the power of the vibration. With Chu Mu's current physique, he was completely capable of enduring it. If he wanted to apply the inch step to his sword technique, the first thing he had to overcome was the distribution and order of the exertion points. He had to shift them from the leg to the arm, because it was the arm that held the sword, and the sword strike was also led by the arm. Therefore, if he wanted to increase the power of his sword technique, he had to start from the root, and that was the arm. The arm was different from the leg. It wasn't that easy to apply the exertion points to the arm. Chu Mu was also comprehending it as he advanced. It took him a lot of time to find an idea and try it out. Chu Mu didn't enter the whirlpool gate on the 5th floor. He continued to search for purgatory werewolves on the 4th floor of the swordless purgatory. Because he wanted to test his idea, Chu Mu tried his best to avoid groups of purgatory werewolves. If there were 3 or 4 purgatory werewolves, he would first kill until there was only one left. Then he would slowly fight and experiment one by one, applying the exertion points to the arm. Chu Mu didn't expect to be able to master it in a short time. That would be too easy and too nature-defying. Gradually, after straightening out his ideas, Chu Mu also figured out the first accurate exertion point. It was just an exertion point. The feeling of increase wasn't obvious. It could even be said that there was no increase at all. Chu Mu wasn't in a hurry, because he couldn't perform the inch step even if he used the exertion points of the leg. While Chu Mu was working hard on how to apply the inch step to his arm sword technique, Yan Feng also made a move. Chapter 1095. Within Purgatory, time was unknown. Swordless Purgatory's 4th level. With a pring sound, a shocking sword light piercing through the air and releasing a shocking explosion. The sword broke through the Purgatory devil beast's fur and penetrated deeply. With a twist, blood sprayed out. In just a few strikes, this Purgatory magical beast had died under Chu Mu's sword. 3 points of force. Sword speed increased by 50%, and explosive power increased by 30%. After killing this Purgatory magical beast, Chu Mu didn't immediately extract its essence. Instead, he recalled the good and bad points of his sword. Under normal circumstances, whether it was a stab, a chop, or a slash, the longer the distance, the more powerful it would be. It was like punching out, retracting it, and then punching out again. The power would be much stronger than punching out with a slightly bent arm. But if one grasped the method of using the inch step, even if one's arm was slightly bent, the power would not be inferior to that of retracting it and then punching out again. In fact, if one grasped it to a high level, it could even be several times stronger. This made Chu Mu recall a martial art technique from Earth called the inch punch. Chu Mu had never cultivated it before, nor had he come into contact with it. He wasn't clear on how the inch punch was used. Perhaps it was different from what he was currently researching, but the effect should be the same. They were different paths leading to the same goal. If he spread the points of force all over his arm like the inch step, he believed that he could erupt with a shocking power. Power was determined by strength and speed. The greater the strength, the faster the speed, the stronger the power. Chu Mu didn't remember how many Purgatory magical beasts he had killed before he managed to find 3 points of force and connect them together to release a shocking power. That sword could be considered a preliminary success. Since it originated from the inch step, I'll just call it the inch sword, muttered Chu Mu with a smile. Although the name had been given, this inch sword was only on the right track. At the very least, he needed to distribute more force points on his arm. When the time came, the sword would be connected in one fell swoop. The power of the sword would definitely be unbelievably strong. While Chu Mu was searching for Purgatory magical beasts to practice his sword arts, a group of Dark Knight Sword Sect disciples were also searching for Chu Mu on the 4th level of Swordless Purgatory. However, the 4th level of Swordless Purgatory wasn't small and Chu Mu was alone. It wasn't that easy to find him. Today, they met Chu Mu. "Senior brothers, that's him." Yan Feng pointed at Chu Mu and shouted. Immediately, several unfriendly gazes pierced through the void and landed on Chu Mu's face. "Disciple of the 5 Elements Sword Sect, let me ask you, have you ever seen a disciple of my Night Profound Sword Sect?" The leader of the group glared at Chu Mu with a questioning tone. However, Chu Mu ignored him as if he didn't hear him at all. This disciple of the Night Profound Sword Sect seemed to think too highly of himself. "Stop right there. We're asking you a question. Why aren't you answering?" Chu Mu didn't reply. Instead, he turned around and was about to leave. The expressions of the Dark Knight Sword Sect disciples changed. Their figures shifted and they surrounded Chu Mu as if they had switched positions. Including Yen Hui, there were a total of 4 disciples from the Night Profound Sword Sect. Senior brothers, he's the one who extorted 200,000 low-grade origin pills from senior sister Yin. My brother went to seek justice from him, but he arrogantly retorted. My brother left the Heavenly Sword camp to reason with him, but so much time has already passed, and there's still no news from him. Yen Feng pointed at Chu Mu and roared, as if Chu Mu had committed a heinous crime. Hearing Yen Feng's words, Chu Mu couldn't help sneering. He now had a better understanding of Yen Feng's shamelessness. Did you encounter junior brother Yen Hui? The Night Profound Sword Sect's disciples asked once more. I finally know why the Night Profound Sword Sect can become a sovereign power. All you have to do is be shameless enough. Chu Mu didn't answer their question. Instead, he said indifferently, You're courting death. You dare insult my Night Profound Sword Sect? The Night Profound Sword Sect's disciples drew their swords and pointed them at Chu Mu. Speak, where's junior brother Yen Hui? Asked the leader of the Night Profound Sword Sect's disciples. Chu Mu didn't reply, because there was no need to. He was calculating how to kill these 4 Dark Knight Sword Sect disciples with the smallest price. He had seen Yen Feng's strength, and he didn't need to worry about him. The key was the other 3. He didn't know how strong they were. If they all reached Yen Hui's level, it wouldn't be easy to kill them all. If one of them escaped, the other disciples of the Night Profound Sword Sect would definitely seek revenge. The consequences would be unimaginable. Take him down. Seeing that Chu Mu wasn't speaking, the leader immediately gave the order. He immediately drew his sword and showed no mercy. 4 swords pierced over like snakes coming out of their holes, wanting to pierce Chu Mu's limbs and cripple him. As the battle erupted, Chu Mu stopped thinking and immediately used the inch step. After so many battles, the inch step seemed to have fused with his body. He instantly dodged the opponent's attack and unsheathed the 5-phase sword to counterattack. It's the inch step. Yen Feng recognized Chu Mu's footwork. You killed my brother. Hatred erupted, causing Yen Feng's sword to become even more powerful. However, he couldn't hit Chu Mu. To prove that Chu Mu had killed Yen Hui, the Night Profound Sword Sect's disciples were even more merciless. Each of their swords wanted to kill Chu Mu. Since they wanted to kill him, Chu Mu naturally wouldn't be polite. He didn't hold back. The sword he stabbed out was suddenly blocked. At the same time, the other 2 swords stabbed out from the left and right, displaying the tacit cooperation of the 3 swordsmen. Under normal circumstances, Chu Mu might have been injured when facing such a situation. However, he had already practiced the inch step to a level close to Deshang's and had also developed the inch sword. He quickly dodged and didn't withdraw his sword, only moving it forward. The 3 points of his right arm vibrated, and the power instantly erupted, causing the speed and power of the sword to increase. This was a sword that defied common sense. The opponent couldn't guard against it at all. Chu Mu directly pierced the space between the eyebrows and into the head. A terrifying power erupted, directly expanding the wound between the eyebrows and shattering the brain, killing the opponent on the spot. Just this one sword had killed an expert not inferior to Yen Hui. However, Chu Mu didn't have time to sigh, because there were still 3 people left. Using the inch step, he hooked the sword of the dead swordsman, and the sword of the dead swordsman immediately shot towards the other swordsman. With a flick of the sword in his hand, it pierced out explosively. Suddenly, there was an unstoppable power. Unexpectedly, Chu Mu's sword that seemed to be stabbing out with full strength was actually a feint. Midway, he spun around and used the inch step, his power erupting once more as his sword changed direction and stabbed towards Yen Feng. Yen Feng, who was attacking Chu Mu with all his strength, hadn't expected this. He also hadn't expected Chu Mu's speed to be so fast. By the time he reacted, it was already too late to dodge. With a poochie sound, Yan Feng's head flew high into the air, his eyes filled with astonishment. The inch step and inch sword had contributed the most to killing 2 disciples of the Dark Knight Sword sect in such a short amount of time. The second was Chu Mu's manipulation of the situation. If it were before, he would have only been able to flee when facing these 4 people. After 2 people were killed in a row, the 2 disciples of the Dark Knight Sword sect were unable to restrain their anger. They almost lost their rationality and disregarded everything, wholeheartedly wanting to kill Chu Mu. Their sword techniques were even fiercer and more berserk, like a torrential storm. They wouldn't give up until they killed Chu Mu. Chu Mu, on the other hand, used inch step. He was able to advance and retreat freely in a circle, constantly dodging the opponent's sword. The 5-phase swords waited for an opportunity to move. Using the same trick, they hooked Yan Feng's sword and shot it out. Then, they hooked another sword into his left hand and used dual sword technique. Then, he used the Wind and Thunder 32 swords at full strength. Up until now, Chu Mu had consumed a total of 30 essence stones. His physique was constantly being strengthened, reaching the level of an ordinary 2-star sword of Gojoseon. The Wind and Thunder 32 swords had also broken through during the battle, reaching the level of 32 swords in one breath. At this moment, under the eruption of his full strength, the sword light was like wind and thunder. The wind whistled and thunder rumbled. The 32 swords transformed into wind and thunder, blasting toward one of the 4. The sword in his left hand used the Wind Quick Sword, 18 swords in one breath. Although the power wasn't as strong as the Wind and Thunder 32 swords, it still couldn't be underestimated. The 32 Wind and Thunder swords were blocked, and as expected, the inch sword exploded. The speed of the sword was extremely fast, and under the terrifying power, the tip of the 5-phase swords broke through the opponent's treasured clothes and pierced into his heart. With a fierce twist, the heart was shattered. Without the sword origin, the heart was even more fragile. Once it shattered, the sword practitioner's body twitched and fell to the ground, dead. In a short period of time, 4 people had surrounded one person, but 3 of them had died. Especially the third person's miserable shriek, it was like a bucket of cold water had been poured over their heads. A chill ran from the soles of their feet up their spines to their heads. The soaring anger in their hearts dissipated. The thought of killing the opponent was also like smoke blown away by a strong wind. With fear in his eyes, he instantly erupted with a powerful sword art, wanting to force Chu Mu back and then escape. Chu Mu's inch step was magical and exquisite. With the combination of 2 swords, he ignored the opponent's sword art and pressed forward. Stop! Seeing this, the Dark Knight Sword sect's disciple immediately roared, I can swear that as long as you let me go, I won't cause any trouble for you. Chu Mu's expression was cold, as if he hadn't heard anything. He continued to attack with both swords. In a one-on-one situation, unless this Dark Knight Sword sect's disciple's strength was several times stronger, how could he be Chu Mu's opponent? He was killed in 3 swords. Chu Mu naturally heard his words, but he didn't believe them. Moreover, even if he didn't cause trouble for Chu Mu, it didn't mean that the other Dark Knight Sword sect's disciples wouldn't. So, killing them was the best choice. He quickly moved and took the 4's spatial rings and holy swords. As for their corpses, there would naturally be purgatory magical beasts to eat them, helping Chu Mu destroy the evidence. This battle made Chu Mu realize that the combination of the inch step and inch sword could be said to be perfect. Compared to using them individually, their power was much stronger. If he could perfectly combine them, it would definitely be even more terrifying. All kinds of thoughts flashed through his mind. Chu Mu put the spoils into his spatial ring and quickly left. Chapter 1096. After all, the 5-phase sword had been damaged before. After being repaired, its sharpness was slightly weaker. Chu Mu swapped it for another low-grade sacred sword, the sword used by Yin Feng. Chu Mu didn't know Yanfeng's position in the Dark Knight Sword sect, but the sacred sword he used was a low-grade sacred sword. His cultivation was at most at the peak of the third firmament of Fortune realm. Chu Mu could use his sword. This sword mainly manifested in its sharpness. It didn't amplify anything else. If it was in the outside world, it might not be as good as the five-phase sword. But in the swordless purgatory, it was better than the five-phase sword. Clasping the sword in his hand, Chu Mu stepped into the whirlpool door and entered the fifth level of the swordless purgatory. As soon as Zhang Xian entered, he felt a sense of danger, and his hair stood on end. Without any hesitation, he executed single-inch steps and moved to the side. A sharp gust of wind blew past his ears, and it felt as if a huge saber was slashing down. Inch step once again displayed its wonders. After dodging, Chu Mu saw his target clearly. It was a purgatory magical beast. It stood upright like the purgatory lichen, but its appearance was more like a lizard man. Strangely, its arms were not claws, but blades. Purgatory saber demon. It was even stronger than the purgatory lichen. The purgatory saber demon attacked as if it was holding two blades. Its attacks were endless, and each blade was fast and powerful. The sharpness of the blade was comparable to a mid-grade sacred sword. Looking at the edge of the blade flickering with a faint green light and a fishy smell, Chu Mu concluded that the blade was poisonous. Sharp and poisonous. Chu Mu was very vigilant. Fortunately, there was only one purgatory saber demon. Without stopping, Chu Mu kept dodging and blocking with his inch step. When his sword was struck by the blade, the enormous force caused Chu Mu's expression to turn solemn. The physique of a purgatory devil beast was originally stronger than that of a swordsman. This purgatory saber devil was one of the best of the purgatory devil beasts, so its physique was even stronger. Clashing with it in strength wasn't a wise decision. The pressure that one purgatory blade demon gave Chu Mu was even greater than the two purgatory werewolves on the fourth level of the swordless purgatory. Under such circumstances, if he was attacked as soon as he exited the whirlpool gate, other swordsmen might have died on the spot. It was not a possibility, but a certainty. This was because Chu Mu caught a glimpse of two broken corpses not far away. They were extremely miserable, having been split into 7 or 8 pieces. The purgatory saber demon did not eat humans, but it had a hobby of dismembering corpses. Inch step, inch sword. In an instant, he cut off one of the purgatory blade demon's blade arms. Once again, he used the inch step and instantly dodged. The inch sword once again burst out, and the other blade arm was also cut off and sent flying. Pushing off the ground with the tip of his foot, Xiao Chen's strength instantly erupted. He leaped into the air and swung his sword, sending the purgatory saber demon's head flying. The purgatory saber demon was over 2 meters tall. If Xiao Chen did not jump, he would not be able to cut off its head. Seeing the purgatory saber demon's corpse fall, Chu Mu heaved a sigh of relief. The purgatory demonic beasts on the 5th level are even stronger than those on the 4th level. The scales on the purgatory saber demon are even tougher than the fur of the purgatory werewolves. Chu Mu could clearly feel the difference. Fortunately, he had the new holy sword. It was even sharper. When combined with the inch sword, its might was even stronger. Xiao Chen cut open the purgatory saber demon's corpse and took out a piece of origin essence. It was larger than the one he had obtained before. After consuming it, the effect lasted for 20 breaths of time. The feeling of strengthening was even more obvious. After taking the spatial rings of the 2 unlucky swordsmen who were dismembered by the purgatory saber demon and putting them away, Chu Mu quickly left. If I am unable to comprehend the essence of sword arts and grasp sword energy, my cultivation in the swordless purgatory can only stop at the 6th level, Chu Mu thought to himself. The tattered clothes on his body made him look like a beggar. The purgatory demonic beasts on the 6th level of the swordless purgatory were clearly stronger than those on the 5th level. Although the chances of obtaining origin essence had increased by a lot, the danger level had also increased. Under normal circumstances, a swordsman who could make it to the 5th level of the swordless purgatory by themselves would at least have the strength of a high-ranked sword of Gojosian in the outside world. Very few would have the strength of a mid-ranked sword of Gojosian. A low-ranked sword of Gojosian like Chu-Mu was definitely one of a kind. If it weren't for the inch step and the fact that he had broken through to the level of Deshang under pressure, Chu-Mu wouldn't have been able to cultivate on the 5th level for so long. Furthermore, he had killed quite a few purgatory demonic beasts and obtained dozens of origin essence, allowing his physique to reach the level of a normal Samsung sword of Gojosian. In terms of attainments in sword arts, Chu-Mu surpassed many swordsmen. The problem was that he was only using a low-ranked holy sword. No matter how sharp it was still a low-ranked holy sword. If he didn't have the inch sword technique, he probably wouldn't have been able to kill the purgatory demonic beasts on the 5th level. After entering the 6th floor, if he encountered 1 or 2 purgatory devil beasts, Chu-Mu would be in an undefeatable position by using inch step. However, it would be extremely difficult for him to kill them. It would often be a bitter battle. After killing his way to the 4th level, Chu-Mu had grasped all the sword arts he had cultivated to the peak. He had started to comprehend the essence of sword arts, but he still hadn't found the right path. Sword arts were the sublimation of sword arts. With sword arts as the foundation, the difference between sword arts and sword arts lay in their essence. Sword arts were the foundation, while sword arts paid particular attention to the essence. Grasping the essence and using the essence as the core was something Chu-Mu had long since understood. However, understanding it was one thing. Comprehending it was another. From the 4th level to the 6th level, Xiao Chun had killed at least 1,000 purgatory demonic beasts. He had been heavily injured several times, but as he tried to comprehend, he still felt like he was stuck outside the door. After resting for a while and recovering his stamina, Chu-Mu decided to continue cultivating on the 6th level. If he still couldn't comprehend the essence of sword arts and grasp sword energy, he would leave first. This feeling of constantly being in a tense state wasn't pleasant for too long. On the 5th level, Chu-Mu had wanted to enter the Heavenly Sword Camp to rest. Unfortunately, there was no one to lead the way. He didn't know where to find it. Without realizing it, he had killed his way to the entrance of the 6th level's Whirlpool Gate and directly entered. The purgatory demonic beasts on the 6th level were too strong. Chu-Mu had to be careful. He didn't encounter any purgatory demonic beast. Instead, he encountered a swordsman. This swordsman wore black robes and had a cold expression. He looked to be in his 30s or 40s, and his baleful aura was shockingly dense. When Chu-Mu entered the swordless purgatory, he had killed at least 8,000 purgatory demonic beasts. However, his baleful aura paled in comparison to this swordsman's. At the same time that Chu-Mu saw the opponent also noticed Chu-Mu. With a glance, there was no radiance, but a deep and gloomy gaze. This caused Chu-Mu's expression to change and his hair to stand on end. Without any thought, his body instinctively used inch step. In an instant, he exploded with power and retreated a few steps. His right hand gripped his sword hilt as if this was the only way to give him some peace of mind. It was impossible to describe what kind of gaze that was. Chu-Mu only knew one thing. He didn't have the slightest chance to retaliate against this person. He couldn't even escape. Powerhouse, an absolute powerhouse. Chu-Mu had an impulse to immediately turn around and flee. However, his muscles were tense and his blood seemed to have stopped flowing. His hands and feet felt numb. The black-robed swordsman only calmly glanced at Chu-Mu. When he saw the sword in Chu-Mu's hand, his eyes flashed with astonishment. Obviously, he recognized that it was a low-grade saint's sword. Using a low-grade saint's sword meant that he was probably a low-grade sword king. However, it was unheard of for a low-grade sword king to come to the 6th level of swordless purgatory alone. "You've grasped sword energy?" the black-robed swordsman suddenly asked, his voice indifferent. "No," Chu Mu directly replied. At this time, a purgatory demonic bear rushed over. The purgatory demonic bear was a purgatory magical beast that could only be found in the 6th layer of the swordless purgatory. It was a huge black bear that was over 3 meters tall. It had a robust body and a tyrannical physique. It could be said to be the strongest purgatory magical beast in the 6th layer of the swordless purgatory. The current Chu Mu wouldn't be able to cause any obvious damage to the purgatory demonic bear even if he used the inch sword. The charging purgatory demonic bear had an incomparably robust body and a terrifying aura. It gave Chu Mu a huge impact. That purgatory demonic bear let out a world-shaking roar and charged at the black-robed swordsman with a berserk attitude. The black-robed swordsman's body was very different from the purgatory demonic bear's. The purgatory demonic bear raised its arm, and a huge black millstone-like palm ruthlessly smashed towards the black-robed swordsman. Under that terrifying mountain-like bear palm, the black-robed swordsman would be smashed into a meat patty in the next second. Chu Mu was also a bit worried for the black-robed swordsman. That was because when the bear palm fell, it created a terrifying sonic boom. The black-robed swordsman didn't move at all, as if he had been scared witless. Chu Mu knew that the black-robed swordsman wasn't scared witless. He also knew that the black-robed swordsman could definitely kill that purgatory demonic bear in one blow. As the huge black bear palm fell, the black-robed swordsman's body instantly shattered. It turned out that it was just an afterimage. At some unknown time, the black-robed swordsman's true body had leapt into the air and unsheathed his sword. Chu Mu only felt a flash in front of his eyes as a sword light streaked through the air. Wherever the sword light passed, a pitch-black trajectory appeared in the air before slowly disappearing. Sheathing the sword back into its sheath, the entire process was seamless and completed in less than half a breath of time. The purgatory devil bear remained motionless. Suddenly, with a poochie sound, its head flew high into the air. Chu Mu blankly stood in place, not moving in the slightest. In his eyes, there was only that spurting blood. In his mind, that sword was unceasingly flashing. An ordinary wave, without the slightest bit of peculiarity, but an incomparably resplendent sword. That sword was like a brand, engraved in Chu Mu's mind, unable to be erased. The black-robed swordsman glanced back at Chu Mu, but didn't say anything. He didn't even touch the corpse of the purgatory demonic bear. Taking a step forward, he slowly disappeared from Chu Mu's sight. Chu Mu seemed to have been immobilized. He didn't move in the slightest. Even his eyelids didn't move. His entire person seemed to have turned into a statue. After a long time, Chu Mu's hand finally moved. Unsheathing his sword, he slashed out. Sword light streaked across the sky, incomparably swift and fierce. But his brows wrinkled. He was clearly very dissatisfied with this sword. Chapter 1097. The distant roar roused Chu Mu. His figure flickered, and he appeared next to the purgatory demonic bear. Using his inch sword, he cut open the corpse of the purgatory demonic bear to take its essence. Powerful purgatory demonic beasts like the purgatory demonic bear would definitely have essence, and it would be an extremely high-quality one at that. With one slash, Chu Mu only felt his sword shake and his hand go numb. As everyone knew, the effects of power were mutual. Chu Mu's attack was extremely powerful. The skin of the purgatory demonic bear was extremely tough, and he only managed to cut it a little. The roar resounded once again, and from the sound, there was more than one. Chu Mu's expression changed, and he looked regretfully at the corpse of the purgatory demonic bear. Without the slightest hesitation, he quickly left. Although he didn't get the essence of the purgatory demonic bear, it was still better than being surrounded by a group of purgatory magical beasts. From the sound, there were at least 3 purgatory magical beasts rushing over. Chu Mu had already personally experienced the power of the 6th floor's purgatory magical beast. 1 against 1, he could contend. 1 against 2, he could fight. But 1 against 3, that was impossible. 1 against 4, he would die without a doubt. Walking on the 6th floor of swordless purgatory, Chu Mu had no choice but to do his best to restrain his aura. Even his footsteps were as light as possible. This could be considered a kind of cultivation. The black-robed man's sword kept replaying in Chu Mu's mind. It was as if he had been bewitched, unable to get rid of it. Chu Mu was also unwilling to get rid of it. The mysteries of that sword made Chu Mu intoxicated, unable to extricate himself. The more he comprehended it, the more he felt it to be incomparably exquisite, profound, and unfathomable. It was an ordinary sword, but the sword light was a resplendent silver. It cut through the sky, leaving behind a pitch-black mark. It was a crack formed by the sword cutting through space. Such a terrifying sword had actually cut open the space of purgatory. One had to know that anyone who entered swordless purgatory would have all their strength suppressed. Even the strongest sword saint was no exception. Sword force. Chu Mu had a flash of inspiration. The sword of the black-robed man that cut down the infernal demonic bear had a resplendent silver radiance. It was definitely sword force, otherwise it wouldn't have been so sharp. Everything suddenly became clear. It turned out that this was a swordsman who had mastered sword force. He did not know what his true strength was, but it was definitely very powerful. It might have even surpassed the creation realm and reached the nirvana realm or even the eternal realm. An ordinary sword strike. It's simple and unsophisticated. It's natural and simple, but it's sharp to the extreme. Suddenly, an aurora seemed to appear in the depths of Chu Mu's eyes. He felt as if he was suddenly enlightened. He only felt that the essence of the swordsmanship that he had been painstakingly searching for seemed to be contained in that sword. The black-robed man's sword had vividly demonstrated the essence of swordsmanship. Back and forth, Chu Mu comprehended that sword and compared it with his own swordsmanship, constantly improving his attainment in swordsmanship. Only then did Chu Mu realize that the swordsmanship that he had originally thought to be profound was still a huge gap compared to that sword strike. Although there was a gap, he was not afraid. On the contrary, Chu Mu felt happy. Because of this, he had more goals, more motivation, and a direction to move forward. When he slashed out, he copied the trajectory of the black-robed man's sword strike. He followed it closely and tried his best to match the charm of the sword imprinted in his mind. Chu Mu had a feeling that if he could recreate the charm of the black-robed man's sword strike, he would be able to touch the essence of swordsmanship and grasp sword force. As he walked on the ground of the 6th layer of swordless purgatory and searched for the heavenly sword camp, he comprehended it. From time to time, he would stop and slash out with the sword in his hand. Chu Mu did not count how many slashes he had made, but at least a few hundred. Gradually, that sword strike had some of the charm of the black-robed man's sword strike. A bit of charm was not enough, but it made Chu Mu feel that his grasp of swordsmanship had become much more profound. During this time, Chu Mu also encountered purgatory magical beasts. In a situation where there was only one, Chu Mu fought. Relying on his comprehension of that sword strike and the inch sword, it was much easier for him to kill powerful purgatory magical beasts. But if he encountered more than 2 purgatory magical beasts, Chu Mu would avoid them. His 5 senses and 6 senses were much stronger than ordinary swordsmen. During this time, he also encountered a purgatory demonic bear. Impulsively, he had planned on fighting it one-on-one. He wanted to see just how strong he was and whether or not he could defeat it. As a result, that battle lasted for a long time. Chu Mu felt that his physical strength was almost exhausted, but he only managed to leave some insignificant wounds on the purgatory demonic bear's body. But the purgatory demonic bear's physical strength was astonishing, and Chu Mu had no choice but to withdraw. Fortunately, the purgatory demonic bear's physique was tyrannical and its strength was unparalleled, but its running speed was not outstanding. Otherwise, Chumu would really have had a hard time escaping. Today, Chumu once again encountered a purgatory demonic bear. As a tyrannical existence among purgatory magical beasts, the purgatory demonic bear always moved alone. When it appeared, no other purgatory magical beast would appear in a radius of a few li. Although this purgatory demonic bear was in perfect condition, Chumu was sure that this purgatory demonic bear was the one he had just fought. This was his feeling. The purgatory devil bear also discovered Chumu and recognized him. He was the small fellow that had left a dozen wounds on his body during the fierce battle with him. This time, he definitely wouldn't let him escape and would turn him into a meat patty with one slap. Madly rushing over, the ground shook. The 3-meter-tall purgatory demonic bear had an incomparably tyrannical body, weighing no less than 5,000 jin. Its huge feet trampled on the ground, causing the earth to shake unceasingly. Its momentum was astonishing, and a terrifying aura surged out like a tide. In the midst of the rumbling sounds, those who were not brave enough would be scared witless. Chumu not only didn't turn around to escape, but instead revealed an excited smile. Previously, in the fierce battle with the purgatory demonic bear, he had yet to comprehend the charm of the black-gowned man's sword. But now, he already had some charm, and the might of his swordsmanship had increased greatly. The purgatory demonic bear was clearly a very good opponent. Crossing his feet, the various points of power in his legs linked up, and his power erupted in a flash. Chumu used inch steps, rushing straight at the purgatory demonic bear. Just as the two sides were about to clash, the purgatory demonic bear's huge black bear paw was raised high, and as if a mountain was about to bombard him, Chumu's figure flashed, disappearing from under the bear paw, causing the purgatory demonic bear's paw to hit empty air. Exerting strength in his feet, he leapt high in the air, and unsheathed his sword, instantly slashing horizontally like a streak of light. This sword actually possessed 50% of the charm of the black-gowned man's sword. The terrifying sword light was incomparably sharp. Just as it was about to hit the thick neck of the purgatory demonic bear, the 5 points of power in his arms linked up, and the inch sword was unleashed. The 5 points of force exertion caused the inch sword's might to increase a bit. The black-robed man's half of the charm also caused the sword to become even sharper. With the combination of the two, Chumu's sword was like a stroke of the gods that reached the pinnacle. With a poochie sound, the sword's edge cut open the tough fur on the purgatory demonic bear's neck, causing blood to spurt out. The wound of this sword was 3 inches deep, at least twice as deep as the previous one. It caused the purgatory demonic bear to feel pain. The great increase in the might of his sword technique gave Chumu even more confidence, and he fought with the purgatory demonic bear to his heart's content. The best sword techniques originated from the strongest battles. A high-intensity battle could cause one to collapse, but it could also cause one's potential to erupt. Chumu's goal was to borrow the pressure of the purgatory demonic bear's strength to stimulate his potential, and grasp the charm of the black-gowned man's sword as quickly as possible. The mysteries of the inch step allowed Chumu to avoid the purgatory demonic bear's attacks, ensuring his own safety. With the great increase in the might of his sword technique, Chumu was able to cause even greater damage to the purgatory demonic bear. Chumu only needed to grasp the opportunity to unleash his sword. The wound on the purgatory demonic bear's neck grew deeper and deeper, and blood spurted out, causing the purgatory demonic bear to go berserk. Its seemingly thicker paws slapped out again and again, causing the air to explode. Under the purgatory demonic bear's huge paws, the surrounding ground was constantly destroyed, and countless cracks spread out. 2 paws slapped out from the left and right, with Chumu in the middle. Just as he was about to be smashed into a meat patty, his body twisted, and he rapidly sank down. A thunderous sound rang out in the sky, as if a mountain had collapsed. terrifying gales whistled, rushing down, causing Chu Mu's long hair to flutter, and his beggar-like robes to rustle. After missing, the purgatory demonic bear's paws instantly changed, pressing down like two black mountains. The terrifying heavy pressure made Chu Mu's body sink, almost suffocating him. At the moment of crisis, his strength erupted, and he used the inch step, narrowly dodging the bear's paws. His bones felt numb. If he hadn't dodged in time, his fate would have been obvious. The purgatory demonic bear's physique was frighteningly powerful, and its self-healing ability was also extremely powerful. The wound on its neck was no longer bleeding, and was slowly healing. If this continued, it wouldn't take long for the wound to completely heal. Leaping into the air, he once again slashed out with his sword. It matched the sword imprinted in his mind, and its charm reappeared. The wound deepened and blood spurted out once more. Sword after sword, the berserk purgatory demonic bear gave Chu Mu even greater pressure. Under the pressure of life and death, it became an even greater motivation. In its berserk state, the purgatory demonic bear's paws were even more powerful, and its speed was even faster. Chu Mu had to constantly dodge, unable to find an opportunity to counterattack. Unwittingly, the wound on the purgatory demonic bear's neck was almost completely healed. Perhaps because the continuous berserk state was extremely exhausting, the purgatory demonic bear's paws paused for a moment. Chu Mu immediately seized the opportunity, leaping into the air once more and slashing out. This sword seemed to be possessed by a sword god. It was indescribably wondrous. It was simple, but the great Tao was simple, returning to its natural state. It was extremely sharp. Chu Mu only felt the sword in his hand tremble uncontrollably, as if it was letting out a clear cry. Under this indescribable feeling, a faint silver light flickered on the holy sword in his hand, as if it was flowing light. Chapter 1098. With a poochie sound, the purgatory demonic bear's head flew high into the air under the impact of the magma-like blood. Its savage eyes were filled with astonishment. It couldn't understand why this human could at most cause some injuries to it after fighting for so long, but in the end, he was able to cut off its head with a single strike. Chu Mu's figure gently landed on the ground. He was also stunned. He absolutely didn't expect that the sword he swung out at the last moment would actually match the charm of the black-robed man's sword. The faint silver luster flickering on the sword seemed to still remain in his eyes. Sword force, Chu Mu murmured. The appearance of sword force, cutting off the head with a single strike. That kind of feeling was incomparable. It couldn't be described with mere words. Raising his sword, he once again swung out, wanting to cut open the corpse of the infernal demonic bear and extract its essence. A powerful repulsive force made Chu Mu's hand numb. This sword didn't have a silver luster. Calming down, he focused on that godly sword. In a flash, he felt as if he was possessed by a sword god. After 10 breaths of time, his eyes opened and a bright light shot out from them. The sword once again slashed out. The sword trembled and a strange power seemed to be born from nothingness. It flowed through the sword, and as it breathed, it flickered with a faint silver light. With a faint crackling sound, the sword light left behind a faint trace in the air, slowly dissipating. "That's the feeling," Chu Mu secretly said. He was bewitched. Ignoring the corpse of the infernal demonic bear and the approaching roars, he continued to cultivate. Chu Mu was certain that this was sword force. Its sharpness was astonishing, but right now it was somewhat unstable. He still couldn't reach 100%. After swinging 3 or 4 times in a row, he didn't activate sword force. Chu Mu wasn't in a hurry. He continuously recalled, comprehending that state, and once again swung his sword. This time, the sword flickered with a faint silver luster. After experimenting with more than 30 swings, only 5 of them succeeded in activating sword force. Roughly a 6th or 7th of it wasn't stable. At this time, more than 10 infernal demonic beasts rushed over from all directions, rousing Chu Mu. I'll use you guys to practice my sword. With a thought, Chu Mu chose the side with the least amount of purgatory devil beasts and sprinted over. None of the 3 purgatory magical beasts could compare to the purgatory demonic bear. Close to it, the inch step was executed, and the sword was drawn. His sword energy surged, and a faint silver luster flowed over it. With a slash, the head of the purgatory demon beast flew high into the air. The sharp claws fell, shattering the afterimage. Then, he slashed out again. This time, he didn't use any sword energy, but he still left a bone-deep wound on the purgatory demonic beast's body. By the time the other purgatory magical beasts approached, these 3 purgatory magical beasts had already died under Chu Mu's sword. In the fierce battle, the inch step guaranteed Chu Mu's safety, the inch sword guaranteed his killing power, and the inch step was able to instantly kill the purgatory magical beast. The final purgatory magical beast died under Chu Mu's sword. Chu Mu hastily cut open the corpses of the purgatory demonic beasts, including the purgatory demonic bear's corpse. In the end, he obtained 4 essence cores. He quickly consumed them and immediately left. The smell of blood here would attract even more purgatory magical beasts. As he walked, he continued to practice his sword. Gradually, he reached the point where he could activate sword force for every 2 swings of his sword. None of the 6 floors purgatory magical beasts could block his sword. Even the powerful purgatory demonic bear died under his sword. Even if he encountered a dozen or so purgatory magical beasts, Chu Mu still dared to charge forward with his sword. He used the inch step to avoid being surrounded by the purgatory magical beasts. Once he activated the inch sword, he could instantly kill a purgatory magical beast. A dozen purgatory magical beasts only needed 20 or 30 swings of his sword. These dozen or so purgatory devil beasts also allowed Chu Mu to obtain a few essence sources and strengthen his physique slightly. Without sword force, his inch sword could only deal a moderate amount of damage to the 6 floors purgatory magical beasts. But when he activated sword force, he could at least heavily injure or instantly kill them. The power of sword force shocked Chu Mu. Chu Mu gave up on the idea of leaving the swordless purgatory. He continued to search for purgatory magical beasts on the 6th floor, constantly fighting and activating sword force. He didn't know how many purgatory magical beasts had died to his sword, but Chu Mu was finally able to activate sword force with a single swing of his sword. Only at this point could he be considered to have grasped sword force. Next was to cultivate sword force to the point where he could use it as he pleased. Chu Mu was very grateful to that black-robed man. If not for that black-robed man leaving an imprint in Chu Mu's mind, giving Chu Mu a benchmark to comprehend and gradually harmonizing with its charm, Chu Mu wouldn't have been able to grasp sword force so quickly. The low-ranked sword of Gojoseon had grasped sword force. Since ancient times, he seemed to be the only one to do so, cultivating, fighting, gradually improving. This time, Chu Mu's luck was rather good. He saw the outline of the Heavenly Sword camp. After fighting for a long time, Xiao Chen was somewhat tired and needed to rest. When he walked into the Heavenly Sword camp, the discerning swordsman could tell that the sword in Chu Mu's hand was an inferior-grade holy sword. They were astonished. Since when could a low-ranked sword of Gojoseon reach the 6th floor of the swordless purgatory? However, just based on this sword, one could not determine that Chu Mu was a low-ranked sword of Gojoseon. Perhaps he was a high-ranked sword of Gojoseon. Naturally, the first step was to unseal the 100,000 inferior-grade primal pills. Chu Mu quickly took out the 6 spatial rings and checked them one by one. The number of inferior-grade primal pills in these 6 spatial rings reached 10 million. Including Chu Mu's, there were more than 11 million inferior-grade primal pills. As for medial-grade primal pills, there were more than 1 million. Including Chu Mu's, there were 1 million. There were also medicinal pills, ores, metals, spirit herbs, and secret manuals for martial technique. As for cultivation techniques, there were no movement techniques or movement technique. There were a total of 6 sword techniques. 3 mortal grade sword techniques, 3 earth grade sword techniques, and the highest was a high-ranked earth grade sword technique called the Mountain Sea Sword Technique. A high-ranked earth grade sword technique was indeed hard to come by. Unfortunately, Chu Mu could only practice sword moves, as he did not possess some of the power of laws. In terms of primal pills, the harvest was already a lot. This made Chu Mu very happy. First, he went to the tavern and ordered a few pots of wine. Then, he ordered a few portions of meat and ate slowly. As he ate, he listened to the conversations of the other swordsmen in the tavern. The swordsmen who could come to the 6th floor of the swordless purgatory were at least high-ranked sword of Gojoseon. Most of them were Nirvana realm swordsmen with a higher cultivation. There were not as many of them as there were on the 4th floor. However, the content of their conversations was not as boring. After drinking the wine and eating the meat, Chu Mu slowly left the tavern. He spent 10,000 inferior grade primal pills to rent a room for 10 days. Then, he entered the room and rested. The only way to rest was to take a nap. He slept for more than 20 hours. When he woke up, he felt refreshed and his fatigue was gone. His body felt refreshed from inside out. He couldn't help but stretch his body before getting out of bed. In this small room, he began to practice martial arts and move his hands and feet. Xiao Chen executed the inch steps. His figure moved like the wind, circling around the room. After 1 hour, he stopped and breathed out a mouthful of turbid air. The sufficient rest and the exercise made Chu Mu feel very comfortable. Then, he sat down on the prayer mat and started thinking. Sword chi was different from sword intent, sword essence, and the power of laws. It was a special kind of energy. It was the energy that one could activate with the sword in one's hand after comprehending the essence of a sword technique. It was a kind of sharpness, the sharpness of the sword Tao. Xiao Chen drew his sword and focused his mind. His wrist trembled, and a faint silver light flickered on the sword. A sharp aura spread out. The sharpness of the sword, the sharpness of the sword energy. With a gentle wave, the sharp sword tore through the air, leaving behind a faint mark in the air and slowly dissipating. After activating the sword energy, the sword did not seem to be hindered in any way. With the sword energy I have now, it should be grade 1, Chu Mu muttered to himself. There was a description of sword energy in the book given out by the 5 Elements Sword Sect. It was a kind of unique energy that belonged to the sword Tao. It was divided into 9 grades, from the lowest grade to the highest grade. After activating the grade 1 sword energy, it could increase the sharpness of the sword by 2 times. If the sharpness of the sword was originally 1, it would reach 3 after 2 times. The sharpness of the sword would increase greatly. It was also because of this that Xiao Chen could cut off the purgatory demonic bear's neck. Activating the sword energy did not consume sword intent, nor the power of laws, nor sword essence, but physical strength. Every time it was activated, a part of his physical strength would be consumed. With Chu Mu's current physique, he could only activate it 20 times in a row. It was only a first-level sword strength, yet it already had such power. This caused Chu Mu to look forward even more to the 2nd, 3rd, and even the highest 9th-level sword strength. However, comprehending the essence of sword arts and controlling sword strength was already extremely difficult. If it wasn't for a coincidence, Chu Mu would probably have to spend a few more years before he could activate sword strength. Raising the level of sword strength was not the slightest bit less difficult than activating sword strength. However, Chu Mu had a feeling that he had yet to completely comprehend the essence of the black-robed man's sword. If he did, his grasp of the sword technique would be even deeper. Perhaps his sword energy would also rise and become even stronger. Normally, he would stay in the rented room and comprehend the essence of the black-robed man's sword. He would also cultivate the inch step and so on. He would also take out 3 earth-tier sword techniques to comprehend. Chu Mu discovered that after comprehending the essence of the sword technique, his efficiency in comprehending the sword technique had increased by several times. When he tried to cultivate the earth-tier low-tier sword technique, Chu Mu discovered that his cultivation efficiency had also increased by several times. In other words, cultivating the sword technique in the future would save him several times more time than before. Originally, he would need a month, but now, he would only need 10 days. Chu Mu had never imagined that comprehending the essence of a sword technique would have such benefits apart from grasping sword energy. This time, his cultivation in the swordless purgatory had completely exceeded his expectations. He decided to stay in the swordless purgatory and continue cultivating. While Chu Mu cultivated in the swordless purgatory, Ning Zhongtian left and returned to the 5 elemental sword sect. As soon as he returned to his dwelling, he immediately summoned his subordinate. After learning that Chu Mu had occupied the celestial couple residence, he was extremely furious. He immediately found a sword cultivator proficient in sealing and prepared to break the seal. Chapter 1099. 7th Layer of Swordless Purgatory. His figure flickered as he used inch step. It was as if he was teleporting. Sometimes he would appear on the left, sometimes on the right. Every time he flashed, the attacks of the purgatory beasts would miss. At this moment, Chu Mu's opponent was the purgatory beasts of the 7th layer of swordless purgatory, the purgatory snake devil. 3 purgatory snake devils surrounded Chu Mu. Their sharp claws and tails were incomparably swift and fierce, enveloping him from all directions. Every time, Chu Mu was almost hit. The purgatory beasts of the 7th layer of swordless purgatory were much stronger than the 6th layer. The purgatory snake devil was even stronger than the purgatory bear devil. 1 against 3, Chu Mu was under a lot of pressure. There were 4 wounds on his body caused by the claws of the purgatory snake devils. He used his sword art. It was the Earth-class low-tier cloud binding mist sword art. As soon as he used it, wisps of mist appeared out of thin air, completely enveloping an area of 10 meters. It interfered with the vision and judgment of the purgatory snake devils. Shortly after, it changed into the Earth-class mid-tier thunderclap cloud-shattering sword art. Thunder rumbled, shattering everything, causing the mist to scatter. The sword art changed again, becoming heavy and majestic. Every sword move seemed to carry a mountain or a sea. It was incomparably majestic. Ever since Chu Mu comprehended the essence of sword arts, he had practiced the 3 Earth-class sword arts to the Deshang level in a short time. Even without integrating sword intent, sword origin, and the power of laws, he could still display astonishing power. At this moment, he was using these purgatory snake devils to practice sword art. This was what Chu Mu discovered. Comprehending the essence of sword arts was only a kind of realm. It didn't mean that his mastery of sword arts had reached the limit. In fact, it could be considered a new beginning. He could still continue to improve. And if he continued to practice sword arts, as his attainments in sword arts increased, it would also have an effect on sword energy. Strictly speaking, the inch sword was not a sword technique, but a method of exerting force. It was not a continuous attack, but a burst of power. Every time it burst out, the speed of the sword would be faster and stronger, but it could not be integrated into every move of the sword technique. It could only be integrated into a few moves or one move. Sword force was superior in its sharpness. After activating sword force, it could be sustained, but the consumption of physical strength was very obvious. Whether it was inch sword or sword force, they were similar to trump cards. Sword technique was the most commonly used combat method. On the Night Darkness Galaxy's Purgatory planet, with the Heavenly Sword Hall as the center, the entrances to the 3 purgatories were distributed through whirlpool gates. Each whirlpool gate was guarded by the Heavenly Sword Hall's sword guards. Some people entered the whirlpool gate and some walked out. Every swordsman who walked out of the whirlpool gate was accompanied by a dense baleful aura, and when they walked out of the whirlpool gate, a powerful aura gushed out from their bodies, soaring into the sky and stirring up the wind and clouds. Some of them even laughed loudly, their voices shaking the heavens and earth. However, no one stopped them, because many people understood that in a place like the swordless purgatory, all power was suppressed. They could only rely on their limited physique and sword techniques to fight against the countless ferocious purgatory demonic beasts. If they were careless, they would end up with their stomachs cut open. Every swordsman who could survive had lingered on the edge of life and death countless times. The suppression of power, the life and death battles, and the suppression of the purgatory made those who left the swordless purgatory feel that the sky was high and the earth was vast. It was normal that they couldn't help but vent, as long as they didn't disturb the order of this place. Wearing a complete silver robe, Chu Mu stepped out of the whirlpool gate. The suppressed power in his body was released, as if it had been revived. In an instant, he rushed out of his body like an invisible sword, piercing through the sky. Compared to the other swordsman's aura, Chu Mu's low-grade sword of Gojoseon's aura wasn't conspicuous. He also didn't release his aura to his heart's content. After venting a little, he withdrew his aura and returned to normal. No one knew that he had mastered sword force. Moreover, his sword force had reached the second level, and its sharpness had increased by 3 times. Taking a deep breath, Chu Mu walked to the black sword stele beside the whirlpool gate of the swordless purgatory. He pressed his palm on it and silently chanted his name. Indeed, he could find it. He wasn't in a hurry to leave the purgatory planet. Instead, he stayed here temporarily. While cultivating every day, he also dissolved the dense baleful aura in his body until it was restrained. Turning around, he left. It was free to enter, but he had to pay when he returned. After paying the relevant low-grade elemental pills, he stepped into the starry gate. His figure flashed, and in just a few breaths of time, he appeared outside the starry gate of the 5 elements sword sect. Without stopping, he leaped into the air and directly returned to the main sect's true inheritance peak. Before leaving, Chu Mu opened the seal of the celestial abode. Other than himself, no one else could enter. Unless an expert forcefully broke the seal of the celestial abode, or someone with profound attainment in sealing could break the seal. When Chu Mu arrived outside the seal of the celestial abode, he took out his identity sword token and was about to open the seal when his hand froze in midair. In terms of attainment in sealing, Chu Mu had also reached the level of a martial grandmaster. Of course, this was the level of a martial grandmaster in the supreme ancient world, and belonged to the peak. However, in the ancient god world, it was only above average. Even so, to him, as long as he was willing, he could break the seal of the true inheritance peak after spending some time. Thus, with a single glance, he could tell that the seal of the celestial abode had been partially broken. The person who could do this would not be much inferior to Chu Mu in terms of attainment in sealing. What Chu Mu cared about was not that the seal had been partially broken, nor was it that someone's attainment in sealing was not inferior to his, or even above his. That was not the main point. The main point was that the celestial abode was his cave, and someone had actually broken the seal of his cave without his consent. A trace of coldness appeared in the depths of his eyes. Partially breaking the seal but not fixing it, this was a complete provocation to him. Taking a step forward, he entered through the partially broken seal and strode into the celestial abode. Before he entered, Chu Mu could already sense that there were people inside. There were a total of 2 people. His expression was ice-cold, and with every step he took, his aura continuously condensed and rose. The sword in his hand trembled faintly, as if it wanted to leave its sheath. Chu Mu did not conceal his aura, and the 2 people in the celestial abode also sensed it. Seeing Chu Mu appear, they did not care at all. Who broke the seal of the celestial abode? Chu Mu's gaze paused on the faces of the 2 people in front of him, and his tone was indifferent. Me. The swordsman on the left revealed a frivolous smile, not at all bothered by Chu Mu's icy tone. He was the 5-star sword of Gojoseon, proficient in sealing. Among the direct disciples of the main branch, he was also quite famous. What answered him was a ball of rolling sword light, with wind and thunder, with an imposing aura. Before the sword light arrived, the sword energy condensed on it made the 5-star sword of Gojoseon's expression change greatly. The other person revealed a look of astonishment. He never expected that Chu Mu would directly attack with his sword. That person was Ning Zhongtian. Coming out of the swordless purgatory, he had rich life and death experience, and his grasp of battle was also very sharp. After a moment of astonishment, he immediately reacted and unsheathed his mid-grade saint's sword. The sword light exploded, dazzling beyond compare. The whimper of the sword was like a ghost's whisper, and a phantom swept across the sky. The sword's sharpness was oppressive, and the tyrannical sword energy tore through the sky. As expected of someone who had entered the swordless purgatory to cultivate. As soon as he unsheathed his sword, Chu Mu smelled the familiar scent of purgatory. That was the scent of purgatory, a scent that could only be obtained after many life and death battles in purgatory. It was a pity that the scent of purgatory in Ning Zhongtian's sword was very faint. This meant that his cultivation in purgatory was not so thorough. In fact, Ning Zhongtian had only reached the 4th level, and he had formed a team with others, not moving alone. Ning Zhongtian's swordsmanship was not as good as Chu Mu's, and his cultivation in the swordless purgatory was also far inferior to Chu Mu's. He only felt that Chu Mu's sword was unusually sharp, and it shocked him. Was this the sword technique of a Samsung sword of Gojoseon? He did not have much time to think. The sword technique in his hand was defeated by Chu Mu. Borrowing the recoil from the collision of the two swords, Chu Mu's sword speed increased, and he swung his sword at the 5-star sword of Gojoseon with lightning speed. When Ning Zhongtian unsheathed his sword, the 5-star sword of Gojoseon also reacted in time. He quickly retreated, unsheathed his sword, and slashed at Chu Mu. This was not the swordless purgatory. Sword intent, sword origin, the power of rules, and all physical strength could be used. Ning Zhongtian swung his sword again, and formed a pincer attack with the 5-star sword of Gojoseon. Using the inch step, Chu Mu's figure disappeared from the two's sight. The inch sword also erupted at the same time. The inch sword was a burst of power from the arm. The power was channeled in an instant, allowing the sword to increase in speed and power in the shortest distance. Simply put, the inch sword was only suitable for physical strength. Sword origin, sword intent, and the power of rules could not be increased through this method. Even so, the sword's speed and power were much stronger than usual. Its power had at least doubled. In an instant, the sword slashed at the 5-star sword of Gojoseon's chest. Tyrannical power erupted, shattering the protective sword aura. Then, the robe shattered and the inner armor shattered. Although the sword bounced back, and the power of the slash was greatly reduced, the remaining power still broke the 5-star sword of Gojoseon's ribs. His chest caved in, and he was sent flying, vomiting blood. You actually dared to injure him. Ning Zhongtian's hair stood on end, roaring in anger. He mercilessly swung his sword, wanting to kill Chu Mu. In fact, Chu Mu had been merciful to Ning Zhongtian. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been a serious injury, but a death. Ning Zhongtian's powerful sword technique came crashing down. It was an earth-rank low-tier sword technique. It was very powerful. With his 6-star early-stage sword king strength, if Chu Mu hadn't entered swordless purgatory, he definitely wouldn't have been able to block it. But now, wherever the sword art passed, violent waves would surge, shattering Chu Mu's body. It turned out that it was just an afterimage. After shattering the afterimage, Ning Zhongtian felt something was wrong. From the side, violent sounds of wind and thunder resounded. Although it was only a human realm sword art, It gave Ning Zhongtian the feeling that it was an Earth realm sword art, and even more so, he felt like he was facing a demonic beast from the purgatory. Cold sweat seeped out. Ning Zhongtian hurriedly used his movement skill. His body exploded like smoke. Chapter 1100. Ning Zhongtian, an early 6-star sword of Gojoseon, had extraordinary strength. He could even fight against an ordinary peak 6-star sword of Gojoseon. It wouldn't be easy for Chu Mu to defeat him. Inside the Heaven's residence, a fierce battle was taking place. Ning Zhongtian's expression was gloomy. It was hard to imagine that a mere Samsung sword of Gojoseon could injure an early 5-star sword of Gojoseon with one strike. Moreover, Ning Zhongtian was on par with him. Ning Zhongtian was determined to cripple Chu Mu even if he had to risk being punished by the sect. His attacks became sharper and sharper as he unleashed all of his strength. The sword techniques he cultivated in the swordless purgatory were displayed to the fullest, bringing great pressure to Chu Mu. Human swordsmen were different from purgatory beasts. Purgatory beasts had more instincts than intelligence, while human swordsmen were the opposite. Ning Zhongtian might not be a match for the 6th level of the swordless purgatory, but that was under the condition that his sword intent, sword origin, and power of laws were suppressed. Chu Mu could kill the 6th level of the swordless purgatory, but it didn't mean that he could easily kill a 6-star sword of Gojoseon. Gale Swift Sword, Wind and Thunder 32 swords. With both swords in hand, Ning Zhongtian continuously performed. Wind rose and clouds surged, wind and thunder intertwined. The violent attacks clashed fiercely with Ning Zhongtian. Terrifying shockwaves shot out. Fortunately, the ground and walls of the Heaven's residence were protected by a layer of protection. Under the shockwaves, sparks flew as if metal was rubbing against each other. Inch step, inch sword, sword force. Erupt. Ning Zhongtian's center door was wide open, and Chu Mu's sword pierced straight through. Ning Zhongtian's expression changed drastically. His protective sword aura shattered instantly, and his treasured robe shattered. However, his inner armor was a saint-grade inner armor. It didn't shatter, but a part of the tyrannical power penetrated the inner armor and blasted into his body, tearing apart his meridians. Chu Mu's anger was vented with this strike. Ning Zhongtian looked as if he was drunk. He staggered backward, swaying left and right. His face was pale as blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. He felt as if his organs were being crushed by a powerful force. It was unbearable as the pain seeped into his bones. He knew that he was injured. It was an internal injury, and a serious one at that. His 5 viscera, 6 bowels, and meridians were all damaged. Even with medicinal pills, it would be difficult to recover in a short period of time. His entire body was powerless. Even the slightest movement would cause him to feel a tearing pain. His entire body leaned against the wall of the celestial abode, and even the sword in his hand almost slipped from his grasp. He found it hard to believe that he would be defeated so cleanly. But at that moment, he felt a different kind of sharpness, the sharpness of sword force. Take him and get out. Chu Mu stared at Ning Zhongtian. His voice was like the cold wind of the extreme north, causing Ning Zhongtian to shiver. He took out a medicinal pill and consumed it. The tearing pain in his body lessened slightly. The heavily injured 5-star sword of Gojoseon also took a medicinal pill and recovered his basic mobility. The two glared at Chu Mu, then supported each other out of the celestial abode. Chu Mu, just you wait. This isn't over. Ning Zhongtian only left behind a threat. If possible, Chu Mu would definitely kill Ning Zhongtian on the spot to avoid unnecessary trouble. Unfortunately, this was the 5 Elements sword sect. Although disciples were not forbidden from fighting, death was not allowed, and neither was one allowed to cripple the other. If Chu Mu killed Ning Zhongtian, then with his current ability and strength, he would most likely not have a good ending. This was because Ning Zhongtian had a backer, while Chu Mu did not. Of course, if Chu Mu could complete Old He's request and give the 5-colored jade to the 5 elements sword sect leader, then perhaps things would be different. Unfortunately, he was only a direct disciple who enjoyed the treatment of a direct disciple. Not to mention meeting the sect leader, it was difficult for him to even meet the elders. Being helped out of the celestial abode, the effects of the pill dissolved in his body, alleviating his injuries and lessening the pain. Senior Brother Ning, what should we do? The 5-star sword of Gojoseon asked. This humiliation must be avenged. Ning Zhongtian's eyes flashed with a cruel light. His brain spun rapidly, thinking of all kinds of revenge plans. In the end, a sinister smile hung on the corner of his mouth. He was the great-grandson of an elder of the main branch, and was highly valued. That elder belonged to the Sword Sect's vast Sun Saint Sun's faction. In a sense, he also belonged to the vast Sun Saint Sun's faction. Chu Mu, on the other hand, was all alone and did not belong to any faction. While he could not directly eliminate him, there were many ways to take revenge indirectly. After repairing the partially broken seal on the celestial abode, Chu Mu began to cultivate inside the celestial abode. Unknowingly, in the swordless purgatory, he had cultivated for a year and a half. In a year and a half, he had comprehended the essence of sword techniques and stimulated sword energy. If other swordsmen were to know of this, they would be envious. Although he knew that Ning Zhongtian would definitely find trouble for him, Chu Mu did not know what kind of trouble it would be. Because, after he became a disciple of the 5 Elements Sword Sect, he spent most of his time in the swordless purgatory. His understanding of the 5 Elements Sword Sect was actually only on the surface level. In a year and a half in the swordless purgatory, Chu Mu's harvest was more than 10 million low-grade primordial pills and 1 million middle-grade primordial pills. Other than that, there were some martial arts manuals. Most importantly, he had comprehended the essence of sword techniques and had mastered sword energy to the 2nd level. However, there was no progress in his cultivation. Similarly, there was no progress in the cultivation of the power of heaven and earth. Simply put, there were gains and losses, but the gains were greater than the losses. By consuming middle-grade primordial pills and cultivating the divine wilderness sword essence, 1 middle-grade primordial pill contained pure primordial chi that was equivalent to 10 lower-grade primordial pills, which was equivalent to 5 kilograms of primordial liquid. After refining several middle-grade primordial pills, Chu Mu felt that the divine wilderness sword essence had increased a little. However, it was not that easy to break through to the 4th level of creation realm. Next, it was to cultivate sword technique. The various sword techniques and sword techniques were integrated with various powers. Unfortunately, among the 3 Earth-level sword techniques, Chu Mu had already mastered the sword techniques to the level of Deshang. The only flaw was that the power of heaven and earth was not complete. At present, the various sword techniques that he knew had basically reached the pinnacle. Chu Mu was currently considering whether to cultivate another sword technique. If he wanted to cultivate a new sword technique, it would naturally be an earth-level sword technique. This was because a human-level sword technique was no longer able to satisfy Chu Mu's requirements for sword technique. As for the 3 earth-level sword techniques that he knew, due to the imperfection of the power of heaven and earth, they were also in an incomplete state. With an incomplete state, it was naturally impossible to unleash their true power. Unless, when fighting with others, they were willing to suppress all of their powers and only use sword techniques to determine superiority. Thinking about it, it was impossible under normal circumstances. After becoming a direct disciple, Chu Mu had a chance to choose a human-level martial art for free. Enjoying the treatment of a direct disciple, he had another chance to choose a low-tier and mid-tier earth-level martial art for free. Chu Mu had already used the first chance and chose the 32 Swords of Wind and Thunder. Currently, he was also cultivating the top-tier earth-level movement technique, Inch Step. It was very suitable for battle, so he did not consider any movement technique martial arts. His focus was on sword technique. Returning to the celestial abode, he opened the exchange list again and entered the martial arts column. He searched for sword techniques and locked onto low-tier and mid-tier earth-level sword technique. Perhaps mid-tier earth-level sword techniques were more exquisite and powerful than low-tier earth-level sword techniques, but they were not necessarily suitable for Chu Mu. The sword technique that was most suitable for oneself was the best sword technique. The sword techniques collected by the Five Elements sword sect were mostly related to the power of the five elements. Chu Mu currently possessed 6 types of power of law: space law, metal law, wind law, water law, wood law, and thunder law. The space law was the most exquisite and profound. There were very few sword techniques that focused on the power of space. As for the remaining 5 types of power of law, there were 3 types of low-tier and mid-tier earth-level sword technique. Chu Mu had to make a choice. His gaze shifted across the various sword techniques on the exchange list. For each sword technique, Chu Mu would pause for a few breaths to take a look. In the end, Chu Mu decided on one of the sword technique. In terms of grade, it was at mid-tier earth level. Autumn Water Long Sky Sword Technique. Autumn Water Long Sky Sword Technique was a sword technique that carried the power of metal law, water law, and wind law. He chose this sword technique because it was the sword technique that was most suitable for him at the moment. Chu Mu's mastery of metal law had reached the microscopic level. Similarly, his mastery of water law had also reached the microscopic level. Only his mastery of wind law was still at the basic level. How difficult was it to achieve the microscopic level of mastery of the power of law? For example, there were more than 100,000 prodisciples in the Five Elements sword sect. However, there were no more than 10 people who could cultivate one type of power of law to the microscopic level. Even among the prodisciples, there were no more than 100 people who could cultivate one type of power of law to the microscopic level. There were very few people like Chu Mu, who was only a Samsung sword of Gojoseon, but had 2 types of power of law to the microscopic level. The difference between the microscopic level of the power of law and the basic level of the power of law was the difference in mastery. The microscopic level of the power of law could be used more freely and its power could be unleashed more fully. Chu Mu believed that the Autumn Water Long Sky sword technique could be practiced even more efficiently, and the power it could display would be even stronger than usual. On the platform of the sky abode, a piece of jade was sent over. In many sects, human-level sword techniques were recorded in Silk Book. This was because human-level sword techniques were not that important. They might even be circulated in the outside world. Earth-level sword techniques were different. Earth-level sword techniques were unique to many sects. Coincidentally, the Autumn Water Long Sky sword technique was created by an elder of the Five Elements sword sect after more than 10 years. It could be considered a unique sword technique of the Five Elements sword sect. There was no such sword technique in the outside world. Therefore, it was recorded in jade. This jade could only be used once. Chu Mu picked up the jade and poured his spiritual sense into it. Suddenly, the content of the sword technique recorded in the jade rushed into Chu Mu's mind. In the content of the sword technique, there was a figure holding a sharp sword and practicing the sword technique. With a crack, the jade broke. Its task was completed. Chu Mu exhaled and sat down cross-legged to comprehend the essence of the Autumn Water Long Sky sword technique. The words Autumn Water Long Sky gave Chu Mu a familiar feeling. In his memory, he should have heard of it, but it shouldn't be a sword technique. The autumn wind was bleak, the autumn water was bleak. Chapter 1101. Chu Mu's mastery of the 2 laws of metal and water had reached the microscopic level. He had comprehended the essence of the sword technique and grasped the sword force. This allowed Chu Mu to comprehend the essence of the Autumn Water Long Sky sword technique in a short span of a day. Because he understood the essence of the sword technique, the practice of the sword moves was very smooth. In just a few days, he had reached a profound level. He was more skilled than other swordsmen who had practiced for a few months. He was proficient in the sword moves and integrated all kinds of forces. The gold water sword technique was easily integrated into the sword technique. The wind sword technique was also easily integrated into the sword technique. Many earth-level sword techniques had several moves. However, the autumn water sword technique was different. It only had one move. If it was broken down, it would be 49 moves. When the 49 moves were performed, the sword technique would be a complete sword move called autumn water sword technique. The gale fast sword technique only had one move, which focused on speed. The 32 strikes of wind and thunder also had one move, which focused on speed and ferocity. The autumn water sword technique also had one move, but it was neither fast nor ferocious. Instead, it was bleak and desolate. When the sword move was performed, it would be like the autumn wind and the autumn water, quietly bringing death. It was a move full of charm. Ning Zhongtian did not appear for a few days. He must be recuperating now. Chu Mu also put it to the back of his mind and focused on practicing. In the deacon department of the successor peak, Deacon Jiang Bei came back in a hurry. When he saw Chu Mu, he asked, "Brother Chu, why are you looking for me in such a hurry?" "Something important." Chu Mu faintly smiled and said, "Come with me." Jiang Bei said, "What? You have mastered sword force?" Jiang Bei was shocked when he heard Chu Mu's words. His face changed and was full of shock and disbelief. Although he did not master sword force, he had heard of sword force. It was an unbelievably powerful force. Every swordsman who could master sword force had a bright future. Chu Mu was only the Samsung sword of Gojoseon, but he had mastered sword force. Was the heavens joking? Jiang Bei could not believe it. "Brother Chu, you can't joke about this kind of thing." Jiang Bei reacted and said seriously. Chu Mu smiled faintly and did not answer. Instead, he drew his sword. The holy sword was unsheathed and a cold light flashed. It was like a stream of autumn water flowing by. A trace of bleakness and coldness made Jiang Bei tremble. With a flick of his wrist, the sword trembled slightly, and a sword hum sounded as if it came from the sky. Then, a faint silver light appeared on the sword, flashing and flowing. The piercing sharpness caused Jiang Bei's pupils to shrink rapidly. His eyes felt as if they were cut by the sword, and he did not dare to look directly at it. Jiang Bei felt chills all over his body. He was terrified and couldn't help but take a few steps back. This is sword force," Jiang Bei stuttered. With a thought from Chu Mu, the faint silver luster on the holy sword disappeared. With his current physique, he could only continuously activate about 40 to 50 sword energies. If he continued, he could only last for about 50 breaths of time. This was because the exhaustion of a second-level sword force was much greater than a first-level sword force. You really mastered sword force." Jiang Bei looked at Chu Mu with eyes full of disbelief and shock. Chu Mu nodded. "I need to calm down." Jiang Bei only felt that his mind was in a mess. He was greatly shocked and could not calm down at all. Chu Mu was not in a hurry. In fact, he only had one purpose in coming to Jiang Bei, and that was to report the fact that he mastered sword force through Jiang Bei. Because he was only a true disciple, even if he enjoyed the treatment of a direct disciple, he could not directly contact the upper echelons of the sword sect. He could only go through the deacon department. Jiang Bei was not the only deacon in the deacon department of the true disciple peak, but Chu Mu was the most familiar with Jiang Bei. It would be good for Jiang Bei to report this kind of matter. After a long while, Jiang Bei finally calmed down. But when he thought about how Chu Mu only had the Samsung sword of Gojoseon, and how he had mastered sword force that even the 9-star sword of Gojoseon could not master, his heart trembled. "Brother Chu, why did you let me know that you mastered sword force?" Jiang Bei looked at Chu Mu with a guessing gaze and inquired. "I hope that brother will report this matter." Chu Mu nodded and said, Okay, leave this matter to me. I believe that after confirming that you have mastered sword force, Brother Chu's status in the sword sect will definitely rise greatly, and the degree of importance you will receive will also greatly increase. Jiang Bei patted his chest and said, I was originally worried that you would cause Ning Zhongtian to take revenge on you for severely injuring him. Now, as long as I report the fact that you have mastered sword force, Ning Zhongtian's revenge will be nothing after it passes. Then I'll have to trouble Brother Jiang. Chu Mu smiled. In fact, he dared to injure Ning Zhongtian because he had something to rely on. Of course, he could not kill him, unless Ning Zhongtian was just an ordinary direct disciple. Brother Chu, just wait for my good news. Jiang Bei was very excited. He was the deacon of the direct peak, and Chu Mu was a disciple of the direct peak. Once such a good thing was reported, Chu Mu would be valued, and he would also be rewarded. All in all, it was a great thing. For this, Jiang Bei was very grateful to Chu Mu. Perhaps the reward this time would be enough for him to take an important step forward on the path of swordsmanship, and even change his status. Aside from Elder Xian, Jiang Bei felt that his warm treatment of Chu Mu was simply too wise. After Chu Mu left, Jiang Bei hurriedly took action. Very soon, the elders of the main sect found out that one of the direct disciples of the main sect had mastered sword force, and it was with the strength of the Samsung sword of Gojoseon. The elders were shocked and shaken. They immediately gathered to discuss the matter. I don't think it's possible. It's just the Samsung sword of Gojoseon. How could he master sword force? An elder said in disbelief. Nothing is impossible. It only means that he's a peerless genius. Another elder disagreed. Regarding this question, many elders began to argue. It was like a market. Stop arguing. Call that direct disciple over. We'll know if it's true or not after testing it. In the end, it was the first elder who spoke. On the cliff outside the Sky Residence, Chu Mu faced the sea of clouds and practiced his sword. Light swept across the sky like a pool of autumn water, desolate and bleak. Jiang Bei rushed over excitedly. Brother Chu, the elders summoned you. Jiang Bei said excitedly. Let's go. Chu Mu was also curious about what kind of reward he would receive. In the entire Five Elements sword sect, there were probably not many disciples and elders who could master sword force. The sect master's peak was also the highest peak in the entire Five Elements sword sect. Here was the main hall of the Five Elements sword sect. At this time, the elders were gathered in the main hall of the sect. Direct disciple Chu Mu greets the elders. After entering the main hall, facing more than a dozen elders, Chu Mu was not afraid at all. After saluting to the elders, he stood quietly. The gazes of the dozen elders all fell on Chu Mu's face. Each of their gazes was sharp, as if they wanted to see through him. Seeing Chu Mu's calm and unperturbed expression, he couldn't help but silently nod his head. Under normal circumstances, when a true disciple entered the sect's great hall and faced a dozen elders, it was extremely rare for him to be as calm as Chu Mu. Elder Xian nodded secretly. He was the one who brought Chu Mu to the main faction's direct disciple peak. He was also the one who allowed Chu Mu to enjoy the treatment of a direct disciple. Now that Chu Mu's performance was extraordinary, he was naturally happy. Another elder's gaze was cold. He was Ning Zhongtian's great-grandfather. Direct disciple Chu Mu, you should know that a false report will lead to a heavy punishment. The first elder spoke. His voice was calm and there was no threat, but there was an unquestionable power in it. Disciple knows. Chu Mu said. You said that you have mastered sword force. Is it true or false? Show us. The first elder said again. The other elders' eyes flickered as they stared at Chu Mu. Yes. Chu Mu nodded and unsheathed his sword. A clear sound echoed in the main hall. The autumn water like sword light emitted a trace of coldness. The elders' gazes also fell on the sword as if it was a peerless divine sword. With a light flick of his wrist, the sword trembled, and a sword hum sounded once more. A faint silvery luster seemed to have been born from the sword itself, flowing along the body of the sword. A sharp gleam emanated from the sword, causing the elders to shudder in astonishment. Sword force! It's really sword force. And it's still second-level sword force. The elders were all shocked and excited. They abruptly stood up from their seat. Their bodies flashed and they instantly appeared next to Chu Mu. Their bright eyes fell on the sword in Chu Mu's hand. It's really sword force. Second-level sword force. Samsung Sword of Gojoseon, not only has he mastered sword force, but he has also cultivated it to the second level. Among the elders, Elder Xian was the most excited. That was because he was the one who brought Chu Mu to the main branch. He had a lot of faith. Elders, I'm still unable to maintain sword force for a long time. Chu Mu said. Oh, then you should withdraw your sword force first. The first elder said. His eyes were shining as if he wanted to see through Chu Mu. Tell us, how did you master sword force? The other elders also stared at Chu Mu. Their gazes made Chu Mu's hair stand. Disciple entered the swordless purgatory to cultivate, and coincidentally saw a senior use his sword. Chu Mu briefly recounted what happened when he saw the black-robed man's sword. I see, but with Samsung Sword of Gojoseon's strength, you're the first person in the history of the 5 elemental sword sect to be able to master sword force. You might even be the first person in the history of the Night Nether Galaxy. The first elder laughed. Since ancient times, although there weren't many swordsmen who could control sword energy, there were still quite a few of them. However, before Chu Mu, they had never heard of someone who could control sword energy at the 3-star Sword King level. Now, such a disciple had appeared in the 5 elemental sword sect. No matter what, it was a blessing for the 5 elemental sword sect. Ning Zhongtian's great-grandfather, on the other hand, had mixed feelings. However, standing at his height, the grudge between Chu Mu and his great-grandson Ning Zhongtian was nothing. Therefore, he quickly let go of the grudge in his heart. Chapter 1102. It was still the sect hall of the 5 elements sword sect. This time, it was not the elders but 3 people. There were 3 people, 2 men and 1 woman. The 2 men didn't look very old, looking like they were in their 40s. In fact, they were at least a few hundred years old or even older. The woman looked like she was in her 30s, but her real age wasn't much lower than the other 2. These 3 people were the deputy sect leaders of the 5 elements sword sect. When the sect leader was in seclusion, all the affairs of the 5 elements sword sect were handled by the 3 of them. True disciple Chu Mu's age is over 60, but he is only a Samsung Sword of Gojoseon. This means that his cultivation talent is average. After testing, it was only level 4. Deputy sect leader Tianxing, who had a scar on his face, said. Although his bone age is over 60 and his cultivation is only at the level of a Samsung Sword of Gojoseon, he has mastered the power of the 5 elements. Among them, the rules of gold and the rules of water have broken through the foundation and reached minute subtlety. As far as I know, before he mastered sword force, he defeated the true disciple of a peak 5-star Sword of Gojoseon with the strength of a Samsung Sword of Gojoseon. Deputy sect leader Hiyu, who looked to be in her 30s and had a plump figure, said, Now, he has mastered sword force with the strength of a Samsung Sword of Gojoseon and has cultivated it to level 2. This achievement is something that even Deputy Sect Leader Bai Qiong could not achieve back then. Deputy Sect Leader Bai Qiong was the middle-aged man with half-white and half-black hair. He was the first Deputy Sect Leader of the 5 Elements Sword Sect. He was a tyrannical existence second only to the sect leader. He was famous for his fighting prowess and his talent was amazing. I remember that in the sword sect there is a pill that can improve cultivation talent. It can improve a swordsman's cultivation talent from level 4 to level 3, Deputy Sect Leader Bai Qiong said slowly. His voice was indifferent. Vice Sect Master Bai Qiong, Could it be that your meaning is to reward that rebirth pill to Chumu? Vice Sect Master Tian Xing said in surprise. I think it's feasible. Most of the disciples with outstanding talent are not lower than level 3. Naturally, the rebirth elixir won't be of any use here. As for those disciples with cultivation talent lower than level 3, they are all relatively mediocre. Even if they are outstanding, they are still limited. For example, Chumu is the only one who is a freak. Deputy Sect Leader Hiyu nodded and said. The Heavenly Travel Vice Sect Master opened his mouth as various thoughts flashed through his mind. He didn't know Chumu, and there was no hatred or conflict of interest between them. As one of the 3 Vice Sect Masters of the 5 Elements Sword Sect, he naturally had to make the 5 Elements Sword Sect stronger. The rebirth pill had existed in the 5 Elements Sword Sect for several thousand years, and no one had ever exchanged for it. Firstly, the amount of contribution points required was too great, and secondly, those who needed it couldn't afford it, and those who could afford it didn't need it. And Chumu was undoubtedly the weirdest of all the peerless geniuses. His cultivation talent was low, but in other aspects, he was frighteningly high. Without a doubt, he was the most suitable candidate for the rebirth pill. The Heavenly Sword Hall's conscription order is about to be issued. Vice Sect Master Baiqiong changed the topic, startling Vice Sect Master Tian Xing and Vice Sect Master Hiyu. Only then did they react and understand what Vice Sect Master Baiqiong meant. Chumu cultivated in Tianxiang's residence while waiting for the Sword Sect's reward. When he returned to Successor Peak from the sect's main hall, he met Ning Zhongtian. Ning Zhongtian's face was pale, as if his internal injuries had just healed. However, his gaze towards Chumu was filled with uncertainty and a little fear. Ning Zhongtian had already received his great-grandfather's warning to not provoke Chumu. As for the reason, his great-grandfather didn't say, but Ning Zhongtian himself had a guess. That guess made him even more fearful. As long as a disciple of the Sword Sect grasped sword force, they would receive a reward. As for what the reward was, it was unclear. Perhaps it was decided based on the actual situation. Chumu was at the edge of the cliff outside Tianxiang's residence. He faced the endless sea of clouds as he cultivated the autumn water long sky sword technique. He didn't fall behind in his cultivation of sword techniques, because sword techniques were the foundation of sword techniques. Outside Successor Peak, a sword light flew over. After circling around, it landed outside Tianxiang's residence. Disciple Chumu greets Elder Xian. Chumu bowed to the old man before him. He was actually quite grateful to Elder Xian. No need to be so courteous. Elder Xian chuckled. If others were to see this, they would definitely be extremely shocked. This was because Elder Xian was usually a serious person. I've come here on Vice Sect Master Baiqiong's orders to give you a reward. Chumu's mind shook. The main event had arrived. He didn't know what kind of reward he would receive. The further a swordsman's cultivation progressed, the more resources they would need. For someone like Chumu, the resources he needed were many times more than ordinary swordsmen of the same level. It was simply impossible for him to obtain enough resources by himself. Therefore, only by displaying one's own talent would one be able to attract the attention of the sect. Of course, there were times when one had to hold back. Although displaying all of one's talent would give one more reward, once one's strength and trump cards were known by others, the danger of death would increase by several times. Because of your outstanding talent and the fact that the Samsung Sword of Gojoseon grasped second-rank sword force, the 3 Vice Sect Masters have discussed and decided to promote you to an esoteric disciple. Elder Xian smiled. The disciples of the 5 Elements Sword Sect, from low to high, were divided into Outer Sect Disciple, Inner Sect Disciple, True Disciple, Personal Disciple, and above that was Esoteric Disciple. It was said that above Esoteric Disciple was the Saint. The status of an esoteric disciple was higher than that of a direct disciple. With the strength of a 3-star Sword King, he had become an esoteric disciple. This was the first example since the establishment of the sect. The treatment of each level of disciple was different. For example, when one became a true disciple, one would receive 1,000 contribution points. When one became a personal disciple, one would receive 10,000 contribution points. When one became an esoteric disciple, one would receive 100,000 contribution points. Although it was a one-time thing, it still represented the difference. Furthermore, a personal disciple would receive 10,000 low-grade elemental pills every year. As for an esoteric disciple, they would receive 1,000 mid-grade elemental pills every year. Mid-grade elemental pills, not low-grade elemental pills. This was because low-grade elemental pills were not very useful to esoteric disciples. To esoteric disciples, mid-grade elemental pills were actually quite ordinary. High-grade elemental pills were more suitable for esoteric disciples to cultivate. However, high-grade elemental pills were 10 times more precious than mid-grade elemental pills. It was not that easy. Apart from these, there was another extremely important point. Esoteric disciples could have their own mountain. True disciples and personal disciples each had their own true disciple peak and personal disciple peak. However, esoteric disciples each had their own peak. All the resources of that peak would belong to that esoteric disciple. This kind of treatment would make countless true disciples and personal disciples envious. According to Chu Mu's knowledge, every esoteric disciple's cultivation had surpassed the creation realm and reached the nirvana realm. In the ancient Sword continent, the nirvana realm was known as the Sword Saint. Even though the 5 elements sword sect was an overlord-level force, the number of nirvana realm swordsmen they had was limited. It was far less than the number of personal disciples. It was very difficult to break through from the creation realm to the nirvana realm. Chu Mu's cultivation was only at the 3rd sky of creation realm, but he was promoted to an esoteric disciple and had his own mountain. This kind of treatment would make many envious. Chu Mu was also very happy. Apart from promoting you to an esoteric disciple, you will also be rewarded with 1,000,000 contribution points, 10 great luo pellets, 1 life and death pellet, and 1 5 elements king robe and 5 elements king armor. Elder Xian said loudly. Chu Mu was even happier. 1,000,000 contribution points, plus the 100,000 from being promoted to an esoteric disciple, would be a total of 1,000,000 contribution points. Such contribution points were a huge number to Chu Mu and could be exchanged for some treasures. As for the great luo pellets, after Elder Xian's explanation, Chu Mu immediately understood that it was a kind of elixir that could increase one's cultivation. Under normal circumstances, 10 great luo pellets would be enough to increase the cultivation of a Samsung Sword of Gojoseon to the level of a 4-star Sword of Gojoseon. Unfortunately, Chu Mu was not an ordinary Samsung Sword of Gojoseon. 10 great luo pellets were not enough for his cultivation to break through to the 4th sky of creation realm. However, in general, they could increase his cultivation a little in the 3rd sky of creation realm. 1 life and death pellet was a life-saving elixir. It was extremely useful for a creation realm swordsman. As long as he was still breathing, he could be saved. The 5 elements king robe was a middle-grade sacred level robe. An ordinary lower-grade sacred sword could not break the 5 elements king robe at all. The 5 elements king armor was a middle-grade sacred level inner armor that could withstand the sharpness of a lower-grade sacred sword. Even an ordinary middle-grade sacred sword could not do anything to it. After wearing the 5 elements king robe and 5 elements king armor, Chu Mu's defensive power would be greatly increased. His survivability would also be greatly enhanced. Moreover, the 5 elements king robe and 5 elements king armor also had another function, which was to increase the power and cultivation of the power of the 5 elements by 20%. With the 2 pieces added together, it would be 40%. Chu Mu was overjoyed but immediately became speechless. Because his cultivation was only at the third sky of creation realm, it was not enough to bear a middle-grade sacred weapon. Only when his cultivation broke through to the fourth sky of creation realm would he be able to bear a middle-grade sacred weapon. However, he would naturally accept such a reward first. Then, he would do his best to cultivate and break through as soon as possible. These rewards will naturally be sent to you after you have chosen a mountain peak, Elder Xian said with a smile. The rewards stopped there, but Chu Mu was very happy because these rewards were very important to him, the Samsung Sword of Gojoseon. If he used them reasonably, Chu Mu believed that his strength would definitely be able to increase again in a short period of time. These are the sword sect's rewards for you, Elder Xian said with a smile. Now, come with me and choose a mountain peak that you like. The sword sect will immediately arrange for people to open up a cave residence. Chu Mu was overjoyed and immediately left the celestial abode with Elder Xian. They flew into the air and turned into two sword light. One after the other, they flew out of the successor peak. The Five Elements Sword Sect was located in the Five Elements Mountain Range. The Five Elements Mountain Range was extremely long and wide. There were countless mountains of various sizes. A small portion of them were occupied by the esoteric disciples of the Five Elements Sword Sect. Chu Mu chose a suitable mountain from the ownerless mountains. Chapter 1103. There were two conditions for choosing a mountain. The first condition was that the mountain had to be ownerless. There was no need to explain this. The second condition was that the cultivation environment of the mountain had to be good. The heaven and earth yuan qi had to be dense, and the power of the five elements had to be clear. At the very least, it had to be better than the personal disciple peak. Otherwise, it would be better to stay on the personal disciple peak and cultivate. In the Five Elements mountain range, there were actually quite a few mountains that met these two conditions. Of course, there were differences, but they were not very big because those good mountains already had owners. Moreover, the secret disciples of the Sword Sect were not prohibited from fighting. If they won, they could occupy the other party's mountain. Now, even if there was an extremely good mountain without an owner, Chu Mu would not choose it. It was different from choosing to live with the sky. Core disciples were at most 6-star Sword of Gojoseon. Secret disciples were at least Nirvana Realm swordsmen. The gap between Nirvana Realm and Creation Realm was huge. No matter how powerful Chu Mu was, he would not be able to defeat a 7-star Sword of Gojoseon, let alone a Nirvana Realm swordsman. Elder Xian first chose 10 suitable mountains for Chu Mu. Then, he brought Chu Mu to them one by one, letting Chu Mu personally experience it before making a decision. If he had to walk through every ownerless mountain, it would take too much time. The 10 mountains each had their own characteristics, but there was not much difference. After walking through them, Chu Mu pondered for a moment and chose one of them. The mountain he chose was shaped like a sword. It stood on the ground and revealed an astonishing sharpness. This mountain now belongs to you. You can use its original name or rename it. Elder Xian said. Zhen Tian. Chu Mu thought for a moment and said. Elder Xian glanced at Chu Mu and nodded. From then on, the name of this mountain was changed to Heaven Shaking Peak. All right, you go back and wait. Elder Xian said to Chu Mu. After Chu Mu performed a sword salute to Elder Xian, he transformed into a sword light and left, returning to sky cohabitation on the successor peak. As he waited, he also cultivated. After choosing the mountain peak, the next step was construction. The Five Elements Sword Sect would be responsible for modifying the mountain peak to a certain extent, and then open up a cave abode on the mountain peak. This will take some time. During this time, Jiang Bei came to the celestial abode to find Chu Mu. He was extremely grateful to Chu Mu. Because of Chu Mu, Jiang Bei also benefited from some cultivation resources, which were enough for him to make a breakthrough in his cultivation. Jiang Bei's original cultivation was at the 9th heaven of Fortune Realm. If he broke through again, he would reach the Nirvana Realm. Other than being rewarded with cultivation resources, he would also be promoted to be a deacon of the personal disciple peak. The personal disciple peak was one level higher than the true disciple peak. The status of the personal disciple peak's deacon was naturally one level higher than the true disciple peak's deacon. However, Jiang Bei refused the promotion. What? You want to follow me? Chumu was shocked. No matter what, Jiang Bei was a 9-star sword of Gojoseon. However, Jiang Bei only smiled and nodded affirmatively. He thought highly of Chumu's potential, which was why he made such a decision. Do you know that you will have your own mountain peak in the future? You may devote yourself to cultivation or go out to the outside world to gain experience. However, the mountain peak needs to be managed, otherwise it will be abandoned. Jiang Bei smiled and said, I will follow you, but I will not follow you out to gain experience. My talent is limited. I will be satisfied if I can break through to the nirvana realm in this life. Therefore, I will manage the mountain peak for you. Chumu thought for a moment and understood Jiang Bei's meaning. What he valued was his potential and future. It could be considered a kind of investment. If he became stronger in the future and had a higher status in the 5 Elements sword sect, then he would naturally get more. On the contrary, he would get less. This was a gamble for the future. Since Jiang Bei was so insistent, Chumu did not object. Jiang Bei was right. Sitting on a mountain peak, Chumu was also devoted to cultivation. It was impossible for him to spend time and effort on managing the mountain peak. It would distract his mind and take up his time. In a flash, 10 days passed. The 5 Elements sword sect suddenly announced to the entire sect. Because true disciple Chumu's talent was unparalleled and he grasped sword force with the strength of the Samsung sword of Gojoseon, he was the first disciple to grasp sword force in the history of the 5 Elements sword sect. He was specially promoted to a secret disciple and was given a mountain peak named Zhentian. The 5 Elements sword sect's announcement was repeated 3 times. Everyone in the 5 Elements sword sect was alarmed. The Samsung sword of Gojoseon was a true disciple. There were not many of them in the 5 Elements sword sect, but there was nothing strange about it. He could only be regarded as a genius. However, with the strength of the Samsung sword of Gojoseon, he was able to understand the essence of sword techniques and grasp sword force. What kind of monster was this? This kind of perception made people tremble. The Samsung sword of Gojoseon grasped sword force. This was not only unique in the 5 Elements sword sect, but also in the Dark Knight galaxy. Even the huge Dark Knight sword sect did not have such a disciple. Shock, the entire 5 Elements sword sect was shocked. Chumu's name resounded throughout the 5 Elements sword sect. He was originally just a small disciple, but now, he had truly entered the eyes of everyone in the 5 Elements sword sect. The 5 Elements sword sect only announced that Chumu had grasped sword force with the strength of the Samsung sword of Gojoseon. They did not mention that it was a level 2 sword force. Therefore, those who did not know would think that it was a level 1 sword force. The Samsung sword of Gojoseon grasping level 1 sword force was already incredible. If one took into account the various types of laws, 2 of which had reached the nuance realm, it would be even more shocking. Of course, just grasping sword force was enough for the 5 Elements sword sect to reward him so generously. This Chumu is actually so amazing. The Hengyuan saint exclaimed. In terms of perception of sword techniques, I'm afraid that none of the saints can compare to him. The saint's status in the sect was second only to the vice sect master and equal to the elders. However, there were some saints whose status surpassed the elders. This was because the vice sect master was born from the saints. The saints who had the ability to compete for the position of vice sect master were all very powerful and influential. The Hengyuan saint was one of the powerful saints who wanted to compete for the position of vice sect master. The other saints were also tempted and wanted to recruit Chumu into their faction. With Chumu's perception, if they nurtured him and let him grow, he would definitely be of help to them in competing for the position of vice sect master. However, when they learned that Chu Mu's cultivation talent was only at level 4, they all hesitated. Cultivation talent was innate. Although it could be changed after birth, it was very difficult. Even in the ancient god world, there were very few treasures that could improve one's cultivation talent. Each one would cost a lot of money. In the entire 5 elements sword sect, there was only one rebirth elixir that could improve one's cultivation talent from level 4 to level 3. Of course, there were other treasures, but they were all suitable for people below level 4. If they wanted to recruit Chu Mu and make him a powerful helper, they would have to at least let Chu Mu's cultivation break through to the Nirvana realm. Then, they would have to improve his cultivation talent, which would undoubtedly cost a lot. Compared to spending large amounts of money and effort to obtain treasures that could increase one's cultivation talent, and the help that Chu Mu would bring after increasing his cultivation, the Holy Sons didn't plan on recruiting Chu Mu anymore. There was no other way. The current Chu Mu was only at the 3rd sky of Fortune realm. His cultivation talent was not high. Even if he worked hard, it would take him a long time to cultivate to the 9-star sword of Gojoseon. At that time, it would be even more difficult to break through to the Nirvana realm. No matter what, as time passed, the renovation of Zhentian Peak was completed. The cave abode was completed. Chu Mu could already move out of Zhentian Peak and live in Zhentian Peak. Zhentian Peak was 6,800 meters tall. The vegetation was exuberant and full of vitality. There were also countless strange craggy rocks. The mountain was steep and the yuan qi of heaven and earth here was very rich. It was many times better than the Legacy Peak and also much better than the Legacy Peak. The fluctuations of the power of the 5 elements were also much clearer. The so-called cave abode was just a general term. It did not necessarily look like a cave. The cave abode that had been completed was in the style of a palace. There were various small halls inside, each of which had different uses. In front of the cave abode's main entrance stood a black sword stele. It was 5 meters tall. The sword stele was empty and there were no words on it. It was waiting for the owner, Chu Mu, to personally nominate it. Chu Mu stared at the black sword stele for a long time. Suddenly, a silver light flashed in his eyes. In an instant, he unsheathed his sword. His body spun and his wrist trembled. A faint silver luster flowed on the sword and a sharp aura dissipated. 2nd level sword force. When the sword was unsheathed, the brush moved like dragons and snakes. It was as if a calligraphy grandmaster was splashing ink. Stone chips flew and a word appeared on the black sword stele. It did not stop and was very smooth. 3 large words, 3 inches deep, were imprinted on the black sword stele. Zhentian Hall. This was the name of Chu Mu's cave abode. The sword stele was black, but the 3 large words were silver. As it flickered, it emitted an astonishing sharpness and a faint fluctuation of sword force. This peak was named Zhentian Peak. This hall was named Zhentian Hall. From now on, it belonged to Chu Mu. Sitting on a mountain peak, all the resources on the mountain peak belonged to Chu Mu. This kind of treatment was no small matter. Chu Mu was very happy in his heart. He entered Zhentian Hall and looked carefully. This cave abode was built in only 10 days. It was very exquisite and very sturdy. There were also many seals. Once it was opened, even the powerful 9-star sword of Gojoseon could not break it. It could also withstand the attacks of ordinary Nirvana realm swordsmen. This was Chu Mu's cave abode. Chu Mu had refined the core of the palace and left his divine sense imprint. The seal could be opened and closed at any time. It only took a thought for Chu Mu to open and close the palace. Around the palace there were spiritual herb fields, which could be used to plant spiritual herbs and so on. Of course, Chu Mu would not plant the spiritual herbs himself. He did not have the time. Therefore, there must be a special person in charge. It was fine if he did not want to plant the spiritual herbs. After walking through every corner of the palace, Jiang Bei arrived. His purpose was to follow Chu Mu and manage the cave abode and the mountain peak for Chu Mu. This could save Chu Mu a lot of time and energy and avoid being distracted. At this point, Jiang Bei also lived in Zhentian Hall. As the owner of Zhentian Peak, Chu Mu naturally lived in Zhentian Hall and began to cultivate. Zhentian Hall was located 6,000 meters away from Zhentian Peak. The yuan qi of heaven and earth was very rich and pure. The fluctuations of the 5 elements were also very clear. It was very suitable for cultivation. Chapter 1104. On the sky-shaking peak that was like a sword pointing to the sky, in a side hall of the sky-shaking hall, a powerful aura instantly erupted. The aura was like a sword, vast and mighty as it soared into the sky, piercing through the clouds, wanting to break through the firmament. Ha 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 ha! I've finally broken through. Jiang Bei's voice was filled with joy. He soared into the sky and roared. To a talented swordsman, breaking through from the 9th heaven of creation realm to the 1st heaven of nirvana realm only required hard work and sufficient resources. However, for those with limited talent it was very difficult. Not everyone with a high cultivation talent would be able to cultivate to a higher realm. Jiang Bei had been stuck at the peak of the 9 stars realm for more than 20 years. He thought that he had no hope of breaking through to the nirvana realm in his life. He did not expect that because of Chu Mu's matter, he would be heavily rewarded and gain enlightenment. The gap between the nirvana realm and the creation realm was even greater than the gap between the creation realm and the God-congealing realm. After advancing to the nirvana realm, one could become an esoteric disciple of the sword sect and enjoy a peak alone. Chu Mu was also happy about Jiang Bei's breakthrough because Jiang Bei was his follower. He acted as the butler of the Zhentian Peak. Peak Master, in my opinion, we should recruit a few disciples to enrich the Zhentian Peak. Jiang Bei said. It could be said that in every esoteric disciple's peak, there would be other disciples besides the esoteric disciples. The role of these disciples was to enrich the peak. Besides cultivating, they were also responsible for tidying up the peak and so on. Brother Jiang, I'll leave this to you, Chu Mu said, but you don't need too many disciples. They must be of good character. Don't worry, I'll be strict with the selection, Jiang Bei promised. It would be best if they could find disciples with good talent and good character. Otherwise, the Zhentian Peak would be in a mess. This was not what Chu Mu wanted to see. If that was the case, he would rather be alone in the Zhentian Peak. Chu Mu continued to cultivate. Jiang Bei left the Zhentian Peak to recruit disciples. He wanted to recruit inner sect disciples. The cultivation of the outer sect disciples was too weak. They had not even reached the creation realm. As for the inner sect disciples, their cultivation ranged from the 1st firmament of creation to the 3rd firmament of creation. Jiang Bei was busy selecting disciples. After Chu Mu finished his cultivation, he opened the exchange list. He now had more than 1,000,000 contribution points. Chu Mu felt that it should be quite a lot and could be used to exchange for some good stuff. Without any particular purpose, Chu Mu casually browsed through it. He suddenly realized that the exchange list this time was different from the previous one. The previous exchange list seemed to be incomplete. The items that could be exchanged for were all worth less than 1,000,000 contribution points. However, the exchange list now had items worth more than 1,000,000 contribution points. Moreover, there was an additional column called Absolute Art. Out of curiosity, Chu Mu opened the column for Absolute Art. When he took a look, his eyes widened in shock. There were 2 types of absolute arts in the column for Absolute Art. They were ordinary absolute arts and advanced absolute art. There were 5 ordinary absolute arts and 3 advanced absolute art. Among the 5 ordinary absolute arts, the cheapest one required 30,000,000 contribution points. The highest one required 50,000,000 contribution points. As for the advanced absolute arts, The cheapest one required 150 million contribution points. When Chu Mu thought of his 1 million contribution points, he felt as if cold water had been poured over his burning hot blood. However, he quickly calmed down. Absolute arts were extraordinary. They were shockingly powerful. In theory, absolute arts surpassed the level of Tian class martial art. Currently, the highest martial arts that Chu Mu had cultivated was the inch step, which was a top-tier earth class martial art. His sword technique was only at the middle tier of earth class. There was a huge gap between it and the lowest level of absolute art. Although he wanted to cultivate an absolute art, even an ordinary one, Chu Mu knew that he did not have the ability to do so. He temporarily gave up on absolute arts and looked at other things that he could exchange for. As he looked, Chu Mu's eyes lit up. He saw something that was useful to him. 1,000-year-old baleful chi crystal. A few simple sentences of description made Chu Mu extremely moved. Although each piece required 100,000 contribution points, Chu Mu still didn't hesitate to exchange for one. Soon, the 1,000-year-old baleful chi crystal appeared in Chu Mu's cave through the transportation platform. It was a fist-sized crystal that was gray-white in color. It didn't look like much, but the moment he touched it, Chu Mu could feel the shocking fiendish aura it contained. It was an aura that had been accumulated over 1,000 years. When Xiao Chen touched it, he felt his palm turn cold. Thousands of images appeared in his mind, and a negative aura filled his body. The use of this kind of baleful chi crystal was limited. Usually, it was only needed by people who cultivated special cultivation techniques or to forge some special weapons. The dense baleful chi had been accumulated for 1,000 years. It was even more shocking when the impurities were removed. If it were another sword of Gojoseon, they would not dare to be attacked like this. It would cause damage to the body and directly affect the soul. However, Chu Mu was not afraid. When the 1,000-year-old baleful chi crystal entered his body, the sword embryo in his middle dantian immediately emitted a strong suction force. All the baleful chi flowed into his middle dantian and was quickly absorbed by the sword embryo, which had reached the top-grade emperor level. Ever since the sword embryo had reached the top-grade emperor level, it had rarely absorbed any negative aura. It was as if it was in a hungry state. Now that it had such a high-quality baleful chi to absorb, it was like a super foodie who had been starving for a long time had found its favorite delicacy. The 1,000-year-old baleful chi crystal in Chu Mu's hand was shrinking little by little. Suddenly, the sword embryo in his middle dantian trembled. A strong force flowed through it. In an instant, the sword embryo broke through its long bottleneck and reached the saint level. At this point, the sword embryo had also reached the level of a lower-grade saint sword. When the sword embryo broke through, the suction force suddenly increased by several times. Soon, the baleful chi crystal in Chu Mu's hand was swept away. The sword embryo also became stronger, but it was still at the level of a lower-grade saint sword. With a thought, the sword embryo moved from his middle dantian and instantly appeared in his hand. It turned into a pale golden longsword. Traces of a desolate aura spread out from the sword. Chu Mu twisted his wrist and the pale golden longsword left countless sword shadows in the air. It was like a pale golden lotus in full bloom. It was magnificent, gorgeous, and noble. After pausing for a moment and taking a deep breath, Chu Mu drew his sword again and performed a sword technique. It was the swift sword of fierce wind. In an instant there were 18 strikes. He did not integrate sword essence, or the power of rules. The wind was fierce. Then, he performed 5 sword techniques, including the metal element sword technique and the wood element sword technique. He also performed the 32 swords of wind and thunder, the sword technique of cloud covering and fog, the sword technique of mountain and sea, and the sword technique of autumn waters. Chu Mu only felt that although the lethality of the sword technique performed with this sword did not directly increase, The control of the sword technique had obviously increased by a level. It made the sword technique sharper and more flexible. Attempting to inject sword essence into the sword, Chu Mu felt a smooth and unobstructed feeling. It made him feel very comfortable. In essence, this sword was a sword embryo that was planted with the divine wilderness sword seeding art. Although it was formed by absorbing various negative auras, it was of the same origin as the divine wilderness sword art. When every sword was forged, various aspects had to be considered. Among them, the conduction of power was extremely important. 100% conduction was naturally the best, but the majority of swords were unable to achieve this. If the conduction of power reached 50%, it would be considered a pretty good sword. If it reached 70%, it would be an excellent sword. As for 80% or 90%, it was unimaginable. For example, the 5-phase sword from before had 70% conduction of sword essence. The stronger the conduction, the greater the amount of sword essence that could be transmitted. The power that could be released would naturally be more tyrannical. And now, the sword that was cultivated with the divine wilderness sword seeding art had more than 80% conduction of sword essence. Chu Mu conducted various experiments. Although this sword was a lower-grade saint sword, in terms of toughness and sharpness, it was comparable to a middle-grade saint sword. Although this sword could not increase the power of the 5 elements like the 5-phase sword, to Chu Mu, it was a sword that was most suitable for him. Furthermore, this sword had the ability to heal itself. Once it was damaged, as long as there was enough negative aura to absorb, it would be able to recover to its original state. Now, Chu Mu could finally use this sword in battle. Chu Mu thought for a moment, then spent another 300,000 contribution points to exchange for 3,000-year baleful chi crystals for the sword to continue absorbing. This sword was derived from the divine wilderness sword seeding art in his body, so it was related to his flesh and blood. Therefore, even if the sword was raised to the middle-grade saint sword level, Chu Mu could still use it at will and display its power. Unfortunately, the 3,000-year baleful chi crystals were all used up, and the sword was still a lower-grade saint sword. It had not even reached the peak of lower-grade saint sword. Chu Mu thought for a moment, then looked at other aspects. He originally planned to exchange for some pills to transform his profound into laws, but he gave up on that idea after thinking about it. Relying on the power of pills to transform and his own hard work to transform might not be a big deal, but if Chu Mu wanted to go further, he had to be careful. Relying on the power of pills was an external force. If he wanted to cultivate the power of laws to a higher level, the difficulty would increase by at least 10 times. Based on the above considerations, Chu Mu gave up on the idea of using the power of pills to transform his profound into the power of laws. For a moment, he did not know what he could exchange for. Chu Mu simply continued to exchange for 3,000-year baleful chi crystals. In total, Chu Mu had exchanged for 7,000-year baleful chi crystals. He had 700,000 contribution points, so he still had 400,000 left. It was not that he did not want to exchange for them, but that he had no more 1,000-year baleful chi crystals. This was a very rare treasure, so he had very little stock. 3,000-year baleful chi crystals had caused the quality of this sword to reach the peak of lower-grade saint sword. While Chu Mu was thinking, he suddenly had an idea. Could he use the undying sword intent to refine this sword? Using elemental sword intent to refine a sword was not a secret technique, but it was not easy. However, this sword was connected to Chu Mu by blood. If he used the undying sword intent to refine it, he might be able to succeed. Chapter 1105. Greetings, Peak Master. Under Jiang Bei's lead, a total of 8 people bowed to Chu Mu with a solemn expression. However, Chu Mu noticed that they were looking at him with curiosity and respect. These 8 people were selected from many inner sect disciples by Jiang Bei. Although their overall talent was not unique, they were not bad and their moral conduct was acceptable. The 8 people were 4 men and 4 women. 2 of them were at the 3rd heaven of creation, while the other 6 were at the 2nd heaven of creation. As the youngest esoteric disciple with the lowest cultivation in the 5 elements sword sect, he was promoted as an exception. The reason for his promotion was that he had mastered sword energy. Among the esoteric disciples of the sword sect's main branch and the other 5 branches, there were very few who could master sword energy. Therefore, Chu Mu became the object of worship in the hearts of many inner sect disciples and even true disciples. After getting to know each other, Chu Mu encouraged the 8 inner sect disciples and told them to cultivate well. Then, he returned to Zhentian Hall and continued to cultivate. Sitting on a mountain peak and cultivating in such a good environment was undoubtedly something that countless people envied. Chu Mu would not waste such an opportunity and cultivated wholeheartedly. His fire profound and earth profound had both reached the extreme. There was a feeling that they could transform into the power of the rules at any time. Chu Mu also consumed 10 great treasure pills and his cultivation improved significantly. However, he was still at the 3rd heaven of creation. During his cultivation, some esoteric disciples came to visit Chu Mu with the intention of befriending him. Excluding Chu Mu, the esoteric disciples of the 5 elements sword sect were all at the nirvana realm. Each of them had a bone age of at least 100 years and had gone through a lot of training. They were not flowers in a greenhouse and did not know the ways of the world. Although they were competitive, they would not bully the weak and rely on their nirvana realm cultivation to bully a sword of Gojosian who was only at the 3rd heaven of creation. Even if Chu Mu cultivated his sword energy to the highest level, the 9th level, with the Samsung sword of Gojosian strength, it would be heaven-defying for him to be able to contend with a 7-star sword of Gojosian, let alone a Nirvana realm sword of Gojosian who could kill a 9-star sword of Gojosian in a second. Moreover, Chu Mu did not infringe on the interests of other esoteric disciples, and there was no conflict between them. They were all disciples of the 5 elements sword sect and were technically fellow disciples. Under such circumstances, if they still wanted to find trouble with Chu Mu, they were either mentally ill or too naive. Obviously, a swordsman who could cultivate to the nirvana realm was not a superficial person. There were also a few esoteric disciples who thought highly of themselves and did not take Chu Mu seriously because of their own talent or background. Even if Chu Mu had a halo above his head, they did not pay attention to him. At most, some esoteric disciples came to visit Chu Mu. While befriending Chu Mu, they also wanted to learn from Chu Mu out of curiosity. Without using sword essence, and the power of rules, they learned from each other with sword skills. This was called making friends with swords. Chu Mu naturally wouldn't refuse this, and he gradually befriended a few esoteric disciples. Of course, not all esoteric disciples knew of Chu Mu, because they'd left the sect to gain experience and tempering, and they still hadn't returned now. After this group of esoteric disciples that had left the sect to gain experience and tempering returned, Chu Mu didn't know if they would bring trouble to Chu Mu. After becoming an esoteric disciple and staying at Zhentian Peak for a few months, Chu Mu suddenly received a summons from Vice Sect Master White Sky. Vice Sect Master White Sky was the most legendary amongst the 3 great Vice Sect Masters of the 5 Elements Sword Sect, and he was the #1 Vice Sect Master of the 5 Elements Sword Sect. According to rumors, it was very likely that Vice Sect Master White Sky would become the Sect Master of the 5 Elements Sword Sect after the Sect Master abdicated. The latter point wasn't officially acknowledged, but many people thought so. Chu Mu didn't know what Vice Sect Master White Sky's cultivation was like. When he met Vice Sect Master White Sky, he wasn't in the sect's main hall, but in a pavilion on a mountain peak. When Chu Mu arrived, he only felt a little absent-minded, as if he didn't see anyone. However, he saw a figure with his back facing him and facing the endless forest. He could see, but he couldn't feel. It was a very strange feeling, as if it was a distortion of reality. His brain had an intense feeling of lack of oxygen, which made Chu Mu's heart feel suppressed. He felt dizzy and did his best to regulate his breathing, gradually calming himself down. That figure with his back facing Xiao Chen stood with his hands behind his back. His long hair was half black and half white, looking very strange. That figure slowly turned around, and Chu Mu felt as if the world before him was flipped upside down. Yin and Yang were in chaos, and heaven and earth were overturned. He subconsciously closed his eyes. When Xiao Chen opened his eyes again, a face that could only be described as ordinary appeared before him. One couldn't tell that this was the first vice-sect master of an overlord sect. However, under his long hair that was half black and half white, his face that could be considered ordinary had a strange temperament that would leave a deep impression on anyone who saw him. Vice-sect Master White Sky smiled faintly and said to Chu Mu, "Sit." Just now, his entire body merged with heaven and earth. If an ordinary sword of Gojoseon saw him, he would vomit blood. However, Chu Mu only felt some discomfort and quickly adjusted himself. This made Vice-sect Master White Sky think highly of him. All sorts of information about Chu Mu flashed through Vice-sect Master White Sky's mind. The more Vice-sect Master White Sky looked, the more satisfied he was. His attitude towards Chu Mu was much better than the others. Chu Mu let out a breath and calmly sat down in a corner of the pavilion. "I won't say much about your comprehension ability." Vice-sect Master White Sky opened his mouth and said, "However, your cultivation talent is indeed very ordinary. I believe it will improve." Chu Mu didn't care at all and calmly replied. In fact, it was indeed so. Thinking back to the beginning, his cultivation talent was only a grade. Whether it was grade 8 or grade 7, it was constantly improving. Now it was grade 4. Chu Mu also believed that his cultivation talent would improve to grade 3, grade 2, or even grade 1. Chu Mu's calmness and the confidence in his tone made Vice-sect Master White Sky nod secretly. Vice-sect Master White Sky spoke again and said unhurriedly, "You're very curious about the reason I summoned you, right? Vice-sect Master, please enlighten me." Chu Mu said. He didn't like to beat around the bush. If there was something, he would say it out loud. After dealing with it, he would talk about the rest. "There's a rebirth pill in the sword sect. Its only use is to improve cultivation talent. It just so happens that it's useful to you." Vice-sect Master White Sky smiled and said, "It can improve your cultivation talent from grade 4 to grade 3. Chu Mu was stunned when he heard this. Then, his eyes widened. Rebirth pill. This was definitely a pill that was very suitable for him at the moment. If he could improve his cultivation talent from grade 4 to grade 3, his cultivation speed would be further improved. His potential would be deeper, and he would be able to cultivate to the Nirvana realm. There was a long period of time from the third heaven of creation realm to the Nirvana realm. It was enough for Chu Mu to improve his cultivation talent, find rare treasures, or use the heaven seizing technique to improve it to grade 2. Vice-sect Master, how many contribution points do I need to exchange for the rebirth pill? Chu Mu asked. He was tempted. Vice-sect Master White Sky didn't seem to be surprised by Chu Mu's question at all. He calmly replied, 50 million. Chu Mu was speechless. 50 million contribution points. Chu Mu didn't know when he would be able to accumulate enough contribution points. Compared to the 400,000 contribution points he had now, the difference was indescribable. 50 million contribution points were enough to exchange for the lowest level of ultimate technique. I presume Vice-sect Master intends to give me the rebirth pill. Chu Mu thought for a moment and said. He wasn't afraid, but he maintained sufficient respect. That's right. Vice-sect Master White Sky nodded. However, it's free. Chu Mu was stunned when he heard Vice-sect Master White Sky's words. He didn't react for a moment. A rebirth pill worth 50 million contribution points was definitely a sky-high price for Chu Mu. Even if Vice Sect Master White Sky intended to give it to him, Chu Mu didn't expect it to be free. However, it was free from Vice Sect Master Whitesky's mouth. Vice Sect Master, this. Chu Mu was about to say something, but he was interrupted by Vice Sect Master White Sky. Your talent is outstanding. You're worthy of being nurtured by the Sword Sect. Perhaps 50 million is a lot for you now, but it won't be much in the future. Vice Sect Master White Sky said. Obviously, he was optimistic about Chu Mu's future. The rebirth pill is here. I'll give it to you now. Looking at the jade box in front of him, Chu Mu took it and opened it. There was a 7-colored pill inside. It was very beautiful. He closed the jade box and took a deep breath. He felt that it was a little unreal. He didn't know if 50 million contribution points would be a lot for him in the future, but at least for now, he couldn't take it out. No matter what, this was a favor, a great favor. Actually, it's not free. Seeing Chu Mu accept the rebirth pill, Vice Sect Master White Sky smiled and said, Every 10 years, the Heavenly Sword Hall will issue a conscription order to gather a batch of new soldiers to enrich the Devil Sword Army. In 3 months, the conscription order will be issued. I hope you can participate. This was the first time Chu Mu had heard of the Heavenly Sword Hall's conscription order. Not only do I hope that you can participate, but I also hope that you can make more contributions and raise your position in the Devil Sword Army. This should be one of my wishes, Vice Sect Master White Sky said. Vice Sect Master, can you tell me more about this conscription order? Chu Mu was a little curious. Vice Sect Master White Sky didn't refuse. Instead, he explained to Chu Mu what the so-called conscription order was all about. After a period of time, Chu Mu had a full understanding of it and was even more interested. Even if Vice Sect Master White Sky hadn't said anything, Chu Mu would have taken the initiative to sign up when the conscription order was issued. This was because, in Chu Mu's opinion, it was a kind of experience, a different kind of experience. It would be of great benefit to his path of the sword. In fact, swordsmen who really wanted to go further on the path of the sword wouldn't refuse such an experience. Chapter 1106. The Heavenly Sword Hall was the leader of countless forces in the 4 major human galaxies. The Heavenly Sword Hall had a legion called the Heavenly Sword Legion. Under the Heavenly Sword Legion were the Divine Sword Legion, the Sacred Sword Legion, the Demon Sword Legion, and the Sky Sword Legion. The Heavenly Sword Legion was only responsible for the Heavenly Sword Hall. They were the elites of all the legions. It was said that the weakest swordsman in the Heavenly Sword Legion was at the first sky of Nirvana realm. However, their strength surpassed ordinary first sky of Nirvana realm cultivators. They were the best of the best. The 4 legions belonged to the Divine Sword Galaxy, the Sacred Sword Galaxy, the Demon Sword Galaxy, and the Sky Sword Galaxy. Chu Mu was in the Demon Sword Galaxy. Naturally, he would join the Demon Sword Legion for military service. Vice Sect Master Baichong's explanation and the 3-month buffer allowed Chu Mu to have a deeper understanding of the Demon Sword Legion. The Heavenly Sword Hall would issue a conscription order every 10 years. Many swordsmen would sign up for the conscription order. In order to prevent too many people from signing up, the conscription order also had restrictions. An overlord-level force like the 5 Elements Sword Sect was only allowed a maximum of 1,000 people. If there were more than 1,000 people, 1,000 would be selected. A Dominator-level force like the Dark Knight Sword Sect was only allowed 3,000 people. In addition to the quota limit, there was also a cultivation limit. One could only be in the creation realm. Moreover, one had to be at least as strong as the 4-star sword of Gojoseon. Once the 3 months were up, the Heavenly Sword Hall issued the conscription order. The 4 major human galaxies were shaken. Serving in the military was very dangerous. However, how could there be no danger when swordsmen wanted to reach the peak? For example, Entering the 3 purgatories was also very dangerous. One could die if one was not careful. If one retreated because of fear of danger, one could forget about achieving anything in the way of the sword. Of course, there were thousands of paths for swordsmen to take. One did not necessarily have to serve in the military. Some liked it and some did not. There were tens of thousands of people who signed up for the 5 Elements sword sect. It was too many. 1,000 people had to be selected from these tens of thousands. Chu Mu's quota had already been decided. He did not need to participate in the selection. In addition, a small number of quotas had also been decided. Over 900 people were selected from tens of thousands of people, not through battle, but through drawing lots, relying on luck. In this way, there wouldn't be any high-tier Sword of Gojosian or even 9-star Sword of Gojosian serving in the Demon Sword Army. Strength was indeed important, but luck could not be underestimated. In the end, among the 1,000 people, Chu Mu's cultivation was the lowest, at the 3rd heavenly layer of fate. The others were at the 4th heavenly layer of fate, while the highest was at the 9th heavenly layer of fate. The registration period was only 3 days. After 3 days, everyone who had registered would pass through the Stargate and head to the sword crafting planet. Each of the 4 major star fields of the human race had a life planet called the Sword Forging Planet. Its other name was the New Recruit Planet. All the new recruits who signed up for military service would gather here for a short period of training. The Demon Sword star field had 27 galaxies. Each galaxy had 1 or 200,000 new recruit. The total number of new recruits from the 27 galaxies was a few million. It was impossible for a few million new recruits to train together. Therefore, they were divided into 100 battalions. Some battalions had more people, while others had fewer people. Chu Mu was assigned to the 88th Battalion. This battalion was filled with mid-tier Sword of Gojosian. Only Chu Mu was an exception. He was a low-tier Sword of Gojosian. After the 88th Battalion commander, Lu Kang, read the basic information of the 30,000 new recruits, he suddenly became interested in a new recruit named Chu Mu. There were 100 battalions of new recruits. The number of new recruits in each battalion was different. However, they all had one thing in common. A high-tier Sword of Gojosian would only be assigned to the same battalion as a high-tier Sword of Gojosian. A mid-tier Sword of Gojosian would be assigned to the same battalion as a mid-tier Sword of Gojosian. However, there were exceptions. Samsung's Sword of Gojosian had the strength of a mid-tier Sword of Gojosian. However, such examples were too rare. It was impossible to set up a separate battalion for them. Therefore, they were assigned to the mid-tier Sword of Gojosian recruit battalions. Stroking his stubbled chin, Lu Kang's gaze fell on Chu Mu's name. He muttered to himself, Samsung Sword of Gojosian, a disciple of the 5 Elements sword sect in the Twilight Galaxy. However, he became a new recruit. How interesting! In the entire 88th Battalion, Chu Mu was the weakest in terms of cultivation. He was at the 3rd heavenly layer of Creation Realm. The rest were at the 4th heavenly layer of Creation Realm. After reading the basic information of the new recruits, Lu Kang gathered his subordinates to discuss how to better train the new recruit. After all, time was limited. They had to achieve the best training results in the shortest time possible. The 88th Battalion had 30,000 new recruit. They were divided into 10 large battalions. Each large battalion had 3,000 new recruit. Each large battalion was further divided into 10 medium battalions. Each medium battalion had 300 new recruit. Each medium battalion was further divided into 10 small battalions. Each small battalion had 30 new recruit. Each small battalion had a small battalion leader. Each medium battalion had a medium battalion leader. Each large battalion had a large battalion leader. Regardless of whether it was a small battalion leader, medium battalion leader, or large battalion leader, they were all veterans. These veterans were naturally soldiers of the Devil Sword Corps. They had more experience than the new recruit. Chu Mu and the other 29 4-star Sword of Gojoseon became the 8th squad of the 8th Medium Battalion. The squad leader was a 6-star Sword of Gojoseon. His name was Han Guang. Han Guang's appearance was very ordinary. If he were to fall into a crowd, it would be difficult to distinguish him. However, he had an aura that the new recruits did not have. It was a kind of desolate aura. It was an aura that had settled down after experiencing many battles. His gaze was incomparably sharp. His every move was simple and swift. While Han Guang was carefully observing the 30 new recruits, the new recruits were also observing him. Chu Mu's gaze was the sharpest. He felt that although Han Guang was an ordinary 6-star Sword of Gojoseon and his talent was not outstanding, in a life-and-death battle, a peak 6-star Sword of Gojoseon recruit might not be his match. I will be with you for 3 months. In these 3 months I will be training you. I hope that everyone can cooperate with each other and complete the training. Han Guang was not overbearing. He also did not put on a show of strength because there was no need to. After 3 months, I don't know where you will be, but work hard to complete the training and master some small skills. Whether you serve in the army or retire to other places to train, it will be helpful. Do you have any questions? If not, let's start the training, Han Guang said at the end. A few people raised questions that had nothing to do with the training. After Han Guang answered briefly, he began the training. The training included many aspects, such as confining the sword energy, using only the strength of the physical body to carry weights, short-distance explosive sprints, stealth, tracking, and a few small skills in the use of divine consciousness. After all, there were many environments in the ancient god world. In some places, the sword energy would be suppressed and only the physical body could be used. Sometimes, when a battle lasted for a long time, all the energy would be exhausted. One had to learn how to conserve energy and speed up the recovery of energy. Stealth and tracking were even more important because no one knew when one would be alone or in a difficult situation on the battlefield. Without stealth, one would be a clear target and would be easy to attack. Tracking could be used to lock onto the target through some clues. Combined with stealth, it would be easier to kill the target. There were also small skills in the use of divine consciousness. These training would not directly increase a swordsman's strength, but it would greatly increase their survivability. A truly powerful swordsman was made up of many aspects. Strength was only one part of it. Survivability was also a very important part. There was also the combination of intelligence and other aspects. Otherwise, with only strength but lacking in other aspects, one could only be considered a brainless bore and would never be able to become a strong person. Some new recruits felt that this training wasn't of much use. The most important thing was still their own strength, so they didn't put it to heart. Chu Mu, on the other hand, was very serious in completing the training. All of this was seen by Han Guang, but he didn't say anything. He had been assigned to this place as the leader of a small group of recruit. He was in charge of the training of a small group of recruit. He only needed to teach diligently. As for whether the recruits were willing to listen to his training and pay attention to it, it was not his responsibility. Han Guang still remembered that there had been a few similar cases. The old soldiers in charge of the training had strict requirements for the recruit. In the end, they were targeted by some of the recruits with extraordinary backgrounds and were sent to the most dangerous places. In the end, they died. The intricacies of a large army were not something that a lowly soldier like him could understand. Therefore, he just needed to do his job well. Those who were knowledgeable would naturally work hard to complete the training. Those who thought they were infallible would train half-heartedly. Han Guang also liked the recruits who worked hard and would teach them even more diligently. Chu Mu was completely immersed in the training. He absorbed all of Han Guang's teachings like a sponge. His physique was extremely strong to begin with, and even if he didn't utilize sword origin, Merely the strength of his physique was sufficient to defeat and kill an ordinary 4-star sword king. Thus, the weight-bearing robe training wasn't too difficult for him. 3 months was actually a very short time. In the blink of an eye, a month of training had passed. Chumu felt that he had gained a lot. He had mastered all the techniques that Han Guang had taught him. All that was left was for him to practice further. After a month of continuous high-intensity training, Han Guang announced that they would rest for a day. This made the recruits very happy. Even the recruits who did not train diligently felt that a month of continuous high-intensity training was not good. Furthermore, the recruits who trained wholeheartedly had a day of rest to adjust themselves. Some of them went to sleep, while others went out for a walk. Chumu stayed in the barracks to organize the month's training. All the techniques and gains from the training were now being reinterpreted. He felt that his impression of them was getting deeper and deeper. Chapter 1107. Every squad had their own barracks, and the members of the squad lived in the barrack. Everyone had their own bed, and they did not even have a futon to meditate on. They had to bring their own. The conditions were very simple and crude. No matter how crude the conditions were, Chumu could adapt to them. After a month, the recruits in the same squad became familiar with each other. Since they were all men, even those who came from better backgrounds developed friendships during training. Chumu sat cross-legged on the bed, meditating. At that moment, someone barged in from outside. "Brothers, someone is bullying our squad members. Grab your weapons and follow me," the person shouted as soon as he entered. Chumu recognized him because he was one of the more active members in the squad. His name was Jingbo. "What? Someone is bullying our squad members? Then what are we waiting for? Let's go immediately." "Chumu, do you want to come?" The reason he asked this was because Chumu's cultivation was only at the 3rd heaven of creation realm. He had the lowest cultivation in the entire squad, and he had never displayed his strength. Others did not know that his strength was comparable to a 6-star sword of Gojoseon. "Let's go." Chumu also stood up. Immediately, the group hurriedly left the barrack. Under Jingbo's lead, they quickly moved forward. "Kneel down and kowtow 3 times to apologize. Otherwise," a cold voice rang out. When Chumu and the others arrived, they saw 2 people half squatting on the ground with blood at the corners of their mouth. They were glaring angrily at the people in front of them. The one who spoke was a 5-star sword of Gojoseon. He looked arrogant as he stared coldly at the 2 people half squatting on the ground. Many people had gathered around them. There were even squad leaders and platoon leaders of various squads. They did not stop the conflict. Instead, they were either gloating or crossing their arms, looking like they were watching a show. It was normal for conflicts to occur in the military camp. It was not surprising as long as it did not cause a big incident. Therefore, conflicts like these were often a kind of adjustment to life in the military camp. As for the reason for the conflict, it was not important at all. "You want us to kneel and apologize? Don't even think about it." The 2 half-squatting men stood up, wiped the blood from the corners of their mouths, and coldly shouted, "That's right. You want our brothers to kneel? Dream on." Jingbo strode over and stood beside the 2 injured swordsmen. He glared at them and retorted. The others also stepped forward and walked to Jingbo's side, sharing a common enemy. Chumu naturally did not fall behind, but intentionally or unintentionally, he was blocked behind because his cultivation was the lowest. In case there was a conflict later, this way, he could better protect Chumu. Regarding this, Chumu did not express anything. He could not possibly tell others that his strength was actually much stronger than his cultivation. "Relying on your numbers, huh? It's just a group of 4-star sword of Gojoseon. I can deal with all of you with 1 sword each." The other party sneered. The few people beside him also had cold smiles on their faces. This group of people were all 5-star sword of Gojoseon. They were the soldiers of the 1st Squad of the 2nd Squadron of the 5th Battalion. All of them were 5-star sword of Gojosian. Under normal circumstances, a 5-star sword of Gojosian was stronger than a 4-star sword of Gojosian. There were very few swordsmen who could surpass 1 star to defeat the other. 4-star against 5-star, this group of rookies is in trouble. In the crowd, a squad leader laughed. Han Guang, that's your squad, right? Aren't you going to help them out? Another squad leader rubbed Han Guang's arm and said, "Let them solve it themselves." Han Guang said, "Anyway, they would not die, so it did not matter if they were injured. Injuries on the battlefield were common. It seems that the rookies you lead are going to suffer." This voice was obviously gloating. "If you don't kneel down and apologize, I'll beat you until you kneel down." The 5-star sword of Gojosian shouted. He took a step forward and a fierce aura gushed out. His sword was unsheathed, and it turned into a cold bolt of lightning. It was as if a bolt of lightning had broken through the sky. With a single strike, Zheng Bo was sent flying. "How dare you make a move? Brothers, kill him!" Chu Mu's rookies were enraged. One by one, they pulled out their swords and counterattacked. "Chu Mu, back off a little to avoid being affected," one of them said to Chu Mu. He immediately turned around and pulled out his sword, charging towards the group of 5-star sword of Gojosian. The 5-star sword of Gojosian was indeed stronger than the 4-star sword of Gojosian. However, this was within the military camp. Moreover, they were standing up for their brothers. It was easy for their blood to boil, and they could not care less. Even if they could not win, they still had to fight. On Chu Mu's side, other than him, the others all made a move. There were a total of 29 of them, while the other side had more than 10. With more than 10 5-star sword of Gojosian against 29 4-star sword of Gojosian, if there were no accidents, the result was obvious. They would all be defeated. Sure enough, it did not take long for the 29 4-star sword of Gojosian to be knocked down to the ground. They were more or less injured. On the other hand, the other side was not knocked down. "Are you going to apologize or not? If you don't, we'll continue to fight," the other side threatened coldly. "Apologize or we'll continue to fight," the other 5-star sword of Gojosian roared. They were in the same team and lived in the same barrack. Their relationship was always better. Seeing them reminds me of the time when I just entered the military camp. A platoon leader sighed. Just because of a small conflict, they fought. As long as there were no serious injuries or deaths, it was fine. Many people's friendships were forged in such a way. "Don't even think about it," Zheng Bo said angrily. Zheng Bo and the others said angrily. The reason for the conflict was no longer important. Now it was a dispute over personal feelings. To be honest, they were not very old and they were in a place like the military camp. There was nothing strange about a dispute over personal feelings. "Fight for me," the leader of the 5-star sword of Gojosian roared. He raised his sword and was about to charge forward again. Han Guang frowned. His figure flashed, and his sword of Gojosian was unsheathed. He blocked the 5-star sword of Gojosian's attack with his sword. He then twisted his sword and threw the 5-star sword of Gojosian's sword away. "Stop before going too far," Han Guang said in a low voice. "Who are you? Why are you attacking?" The 5-star sword of Gojosian gripped his sword tightly and stared warily at Han Guang. He knew that he was not a match for this person in front of him. "I'm their platoon leader," Han Guang said expressionlessly. "Han Guang, you're really getting worse. As a platoon leader, you're actually interfering with the matters of your platoon members." A mocking voice rang out. A person walked out from the crowd and stared at Han Guang with a cold smile. "Dai Yi, take care of your platoon," Han Guang said. "My platoon is not bad," Dai Yi said. Seeing that the conflict between the platoon members was about to turn into a conflict between platoon leaders, the eyes of the onlookers lit up. "Dai Yi and Han Guang, are these two guys going to fight again? I remember that last time, Han Guang was the one at a disadvantage." The people who were talking were naturally the platoon leaders. They were from the same battalion and knew each other. I wonder who will win this time? Han Guang, let your platoon members admit their mistakes and apologize. This matter will be settled, Dai Yi said coldly. Your platoon members injured my platoon members. The ones who should admit their mistakes and apologize are your platoon members. Han Guang said angrily. Originally, a platoon leader should not interfere in a conflict between platoon members, but now it had turned into a conflict between platoon leaders. What a joke! Being injured by my platoon members only shows that your platoon members are incompetent. Dai Yi laughed. When Jing Bo and the others heard this, their faces darkened and their anger surged. Look at your platoon members. A 4-star sword of Gojoseon is one thing, but you even have a Samsung sword of Gojoseon. Don't tell me you're a super genius that can kill a 4-star sword of Gojoseon with a wave of your sword and scare off a 5-star sword of Gojoseon. Dai Yi turned to Chu Mu. You're right. I am that kind of super genius. Chu Mu stepped forward and stared at Dai Yi neither slowly nor quickly, neither servile nor overbearing. Chu Mu's words shocked everyone, and they all looked at him in a daze. Everyone can talk big. If you're that kind of super genius, then I'm the super genius that can sweep away all the other sword of Gojoseon. Dai Yi was a little annoyed by Chu Mu's Samsung sword of Gojoseon's rebuttal. Open your eyes and watch carefully, Chu Mu said indifferently. He walked step by step towards the 5-star sword of Gojoseon and slowly pulled out his sword. In an instant, his power erupted and his speed increased to the extreme. He turned into an afterimage and slashed out with his sword. Like a violent wind, the power was astonishing. The 5-star sword of Gojoseon's face changed and he quickly counterattacked with his sword. However, Chu Mu's sword was like a thunderbolt, like a meteor piercing through the sky. The tyrannical power erupted and directly destroyed the 5-star sword of Gojoseon's counterattack. The sword arrived without any obstruction and directly bombarded the 5-star sword of Gojoseon's chest. With a bang, the 5-star sword of Gojoseon trembled and was sent flying. He spat out blood and slid a few meters away. Suddenly, everyone was dumbfounded. There was complete silence. So cruel. Was this still the Samsung sword of Gojoseon? Since when did the Samsung sword of Gojoseon become so terrifying? He could actually send a 5-star sword of Gojoseon flying and spitting out blood with a single sword. They felt like they were in a dream. Their minds seemed to be frozen. Some of them had seen the Samsung sword of Gojoseon defeating the 4-star sword of Gojoseon with their own eyes. Some of them had also heard of it. However, the Samsung sword of Gojoseon defeating the 5-star sword of Gojoseon with a single sword strike was not only unheard of, but also unseen. However, Chu Mu did not stop. He used the inch step and instantly approached another 5-star sword of Gojoseon. He attacked again and sent him flying with a single sword strike. The other 5-star sword of Gojoseon quickly reacted. They roared and attacked Chu Mu with their swords. However, all of them missed. Chu Mu's sword shuttled through the gaps of the sword of Gojoseon. He attacked again and sent another person flying. Tyrannical strength was displayed. More than a dozen 5-star sword of Gojoseon were all defeated by Chu Mu's sword. They were all sent flying one by one. Small Captain Dai Yi, is it? Now you can go sweep through all of the Sword Kings. I'm sure everyone would be happy to see that. Chu Mu retracted his sword and turned around to face Dai Yi as he spoke indifferently. Dai Yi's face changed, alternating between green, red, and white. His heart was incomparably angry, but he didn't know what to say. His lips trembled as he fiercely swept a glance at Chu Mu. With a gloomy face, he turned around and left in large strides. Apologize. Seeing Dai Yi leave, Chu Mu did not stop him. Instead, he looked at the 5-star sword of Gojoseon and said coldly. Chapter 1108. The strongest recruit defeated 15 5-star Sword of Gojoseon with one sword. The most ferocious Samsung Sword of Gojoseon. Chumu became famous. His name resounded throughout the 88th recruit camp. Even the camp commander was alarmed. A Samsung Sword of Gojoseon defeated more than 10 5-star Sword of Gojoseon. Camp Commander Liu Kang's face was full of surprise. When he first heard the news, he thought it was a joke. A Samsung Sword of Gojoseon defeating a 4-star Sword of Gojoseon was a genius, but it was not a rare thing. A Samsung Sword of Gojoseon defeating more than 10 4-star Sword of Gojoseon was indeed shocking. But a Samsung Sword of Gojoseon defeating a 5-star Sword of Gojoseon would cause a stir. Because there were too few people who could challenge people who were 2 stars higher than them. A Samsung Sword of Gojoseon defeating more than 10 5-star Sword of Gojoseon, although the 5-star Sword of Gojoseon did not cooperate well, it was still shocking. Extremely shocking. Such a monster is actually serving in the military. Is someone trying to harm you? Liu Kang muttered to himself. Chumu's performance was truly too monstrous. It was monstrous to the point that it caused others to be terrified. Such a monstrous genius, under normal circumstances, would be protected by any faction and heavily nurtured. Serving in the military wasn't something fun. If one wasn't careful, they could die. That was why Liu Kang thought so. Forget it, these things have nothing to do with me. Liu Kang shook his head. It's a pity that Chumu's cultivation is too low. If he was at the 8th or 9th layer of Fortune Realm, no matter how monstrous a person was, no matter how much he challenged someone who was at a higher level, if his starting point was too low, the power he could unleash would ultimately be limited. Even if Chumu was so monstrous that he could use a Samsung Sword of Gojoseon to fight against a 6-star Sword of Gojoseon, he wouldn't be of much help in the war. This was because there were too many 6-star Swords of Gojoseon, and there were also many advanced Swords of Gojoseon that were stronger than a 6-star Sword of Gojoseon. Boss Chu, you're my boss from now on. Jingbo looked like he wanted to hug Chu Yang's thigh as he yelled. Boss! The others shouted in unison, almost overturning the living quarters. Chu Mu's sudden outburst stunned them. It was hard to imagine that Chu Mu, who was in the same squad as them and had the lowest cultivation, was actually the strongest one among them. Previously, they had guessed that although Chu Mu was a Samsung Sword of Gojoseon, he had the strength to fight against a 6-star Sword of Gojoseon. That was why he served in the army. Therefore, no one looked down on him. However, fighting against a 6-star Sword of Gojoseon and defeating a 6-star Sword of Gojoseon were two different concepts. Defeating a 6-star Sword of Gojoseon and defeating a 6-star Sword of Gojoseon were two different concepts. Without any suspense, Chu Mu became the boss of the 8th Squad of the 8th Squadron of the 8th Battalion. Even the squad leader, Han Guang, admired Chu Mu. He had incomparably powerful talent, but he wouldn't show it off everywhere. After a day of rest, the training began again. As soon as Chu Mu appeared, he immediately became the focus of attention. Countless gazes swept across his face. Those who didn't see it with their own eyes wanted to see if Chu Mu had 3 heads and 6 arms. He was actually so tyrannical and ferocious. Chu Mu's expression was indifferent. He ignored all the gazes around him. 3 months of training was actually very short. The first month was focused on individual training. In the second month, the individual training was reduced. More than half of the time was allocated for squad training. This was a battle formation called the Perfect Circle Formation. It focused everyone's strength to form a whole. Serving in the army was very likely to go to the battlefield. The battlefield was not a child's play. It was also different from individual swordsmen going out to gain experience. It was a group battle. In such a battlefield, the strength of one person was weak. In a squad of 30 people, how could they cooperate better? How could they perform better than their own standards? How could they better kill the enemy and protect themselves, and so on? Chu Mu didn't know if he didn't train, but once he started training, he understood. If those 5-star sword of Gojoseon from before had grasped the current method of cooperation, even if he used his rank 2 sword force, he might not be able to defeat them. Although the method of cooperation wasn't complicated, once it was formed, it was like a whole. It wasn't scattered anymore. A month of training passed quickly. Everyone had basically grasped the battle formation called the perfect circle formation. They could also familiarize themselves with it. However, there was still a big gap between them and the true perfect circle formation. It was very simple. They needed to experience the test of a real battle. Just relying on practice was ultimately limited. They rested for a day again. However, this time, they didn't encounter any conflicts and passed peacefully. In the 3rd month, which was also the last month, other than revisiting the previous 2 months of training, there was a new training content. That was the collective training of the entire 18 recruit battalions. Simply put, it was the super version of the perfect circle formation. The squad's perfect circle formation was the most basic. After that, they would combine the squad's perfect circle formations to form a huge perfect circle formation of 30,000 people. If it wasn't for some restrictions, they might even be able to form a huge perfect circle formation of a few million people. Very quickly, the 3rd month had passed. The results of the large-scale perfect circle formation training had basically reached the standard. If they wanted to improve further, they would have to go through a real battle. After 3 months of continuous training, every swordsman had grown. The members of the same squad had also become closer. Chu Mu's position as the boss was even more secure. This was because the other members admired him very much. Not only was he strong, but his comprehension was also amazing. He was able to understand and grasp the things that Han Guang taught him immediately. His completion rate was something that even Han Guang admired. The 3 months of training have ended. Next, it is time to test the results of your training. As the squads gathered, Han Guang said, according to the usual rules, there will be 3 competitions. They are the squad competition, the recruit battalion competition, and the single soldier battle. Next, Han Guang simply explained the contents of the 3 competitions. The squad competition was a competition where 30 members of each squad would use the perfect circle formation to fight against the other squads. This competition would first take place between the squadrons, then the brigade, then the recruit battalions. In the end, if one stood out from all the other battalions and was ranked in the top 3, they would be rewarded. The recruit battalion competition was a competition between every single recruit battalion. There were a total of 100 battalions. The first place would also be rewarded, but the second, third, and other rankings would not. The final single soldier battle was a single soldier battle. War was indeed collective, but sometimes, it would inevitably degenerate into individual actions. Therefore, the single soldier battle was also a very important segment. With your strength, it would be difficult to get a good result in the squad competition. However, the most important thing is to participate. It is an opportunity to test the results of your training. Han Guang said, as for the recruit battalion competition, it is hard to predict. In the final single soldier battle, each squad will choose one person to compete in the recruit battalion competition under a restricted environment. After getting the top 3, they will be able to participate in the recruit battalion competition. The top 3 will receive generous rewards from the headquarters. In your minds, who is the most suitable candidate? In fact, Han Guang already had the most suitable candidate in mind. Boss Chu. Jingbo was the first to raise his hand and shout. I also recommend Boss Chu. Boss Chu is the best candidate. Boss Chu will sweep the entire recruit battalion competition. Boss Chu is mighty. Boss Chu is number 1. The 29 members shouted one after another. The more they shouted, the more excited they became. Chu Mu, what do you think? Han Guang looked at Chu Mu. Okay. Chu Mu accepted without hesitation. Chu Mu did not know whether he would be the champion in the end. However, this was a good opportunity to test himself and train himself. Since the person has been chosen, then everyone should have a good rest today. Tomorrow, the squad competition will begin. Even if you can't get the top 3, you have to do your best to fight, Han Guang said. Han Guang said. It wasn't that he was intentionally discouraging them, but he was simply stating a fact. In the small team competition, other than Chu Mu, the other 29 people all had the strength of a 4-star sword king. Under the same situation of using a perfect circle battle formation, they simply weren't the opponents of a 6-star sword king. However, the most important thing was to participate. Everyone returned to the barracks and began to discuss heatedly. Let's not talk about the squad competition and the recruit battalion competition. I am thinking, with Boss Chu's strength, can he stand out in the single soldier battle? I think it's difficult. Boss Chu is indeed a monster, but his cultivation is too low. If his cultivation is at the 7th heaven of creation realm, he might be able to win the championship. I don't think so. Don't forget what the squad leader said. The single soldier battle is carried out in a restricted environment. Everyone's cultivation might be limited to the 3rd or 4th heaven of creation realm. That shouldn't be possible. There might be other restrictions. We will know what the restrictions are when the time comes, Chu Mu interrupted. Everyone should rest well and prepare for tomorrow's squad competition. Boss Chu is right. Let's rest. In this squad, Chu Mu's prestige was even higher than that of the squad leader Han Guang. Everyone listened to what he said. For a moment, the barracks quieted down. In the other barracks, it was still lively. In particular, the dozen or so 5-star sword of Gojoseon who were defeated by Chu Mu last time were rubbing their hands together. They hoped to meet Chu Mu's team in the squad competition and teach Chu Mu and his team a lesson. There was no hatred. They just wanted to save face. They knew that they were no match for that monster in a one-on-one battle. However, after learning the perfect circle battle formation, they knew that the battle formation was very powerful. They would definitely be able to defeat their opponent. Therefore, they were all looking forward to it, especially those 5-star sword of Gojoseon who were defeated by Chu Mu.